The German Shepherd hadn't made a sound in 19 days. Not a bark, not a whimper, nothing. Just those amber eyes tracking every movement from the end of a 4-foot chain bolted to a concrete post behind Delray County Gas and Supply. His ribs showed through his coat like fingers pressing through wet cloth. The water bowl had been empty since Tuesday. Deputy Harlan Voss knew it was empty because he'd kicked it over himself, then stood there watching the dog strain toward a puddle 6 inches beyond his reach. The dog's name was Atlas, and the woman who pulled into that gas station on a Wednesday morning was about to make Harlan Voss understand exactly how badly he'd miscalculated every single thing about his life. Before we go any further, if this story grips you, if you feel your chest tighten the way I felt writing it, subscribe to this channel right now and follow this story all the way to the end. Hit like and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The truck came in from Route 9 heading west, a faded green Silverado with a cracked left headlight and a bumper sticker that had mostly peeled away until only the letters USN remained visible beneath the grime. It rolled to a stop at Pump 3 of Delray County Gas and Supply on the kind of morning where the air smelled like iron and coming rain, where the flat Texas scrubland stretched out in every direction until it just gave up and disappeared into haze. Evelyn Marsh cut the engine and sat for a moment with her hand on the key, running through her mental checklist the way she always did between long stretches of road. Fuel, water, something that wasn't a gas station granola bar if possible. She had a clinic shift in Sutter Falls starting at 11, 70-some miles still ahead of her, and the left rear tire had been pulling slightly since Ridgeline, so she needed to check the pressure before she got back on the highway. She was thinking about the tire when she saw the dog. He was behind the station, in the strip of cracked concrete between the back wall and the fence line. A German Shepherd, or what was left of one, dark saddle coat, erect ears that still stood despite everything, but the rest of him hollowed out like something had scooped the life from the inside and left the shell. A chain ran from his collar to a post. Short chain. The kind that didn't allow much more than standing and lying down, and the specific psychological torture of being able to see the entire world just beyond arm's reach. Evelyn got out of the truck. She didn't go toward the dog immediately. She started the fuel pump, checked her phone, 2 missed calls from the clinic, nothing urgent, and then walked toward the station's side wall under the pretense of reading a posted notice about propane tank exchange. From there, she had a cleaner angle. The dog was watching her. Not the way scared dogs watched strangers, with averted eyes and lowered head. He was watching her directly. Steady. The kind of attention that wasn't aggression and wasn't submission. It was assessment, like he was deciding something. She counted his ribs. 7 visible on the left side. The concrete beneath him had a brownish stain that suggested an untreated wound at some point. The chain had worn the fur from around his collar, and the skin beneath was raw and dark. The water bowl was on its side, bone dry, about 3 feet from where his chain would allow him to reach. Evelyn stood there for 11 seconds, doing what she'd trained herself to do before any action in any situation. Breathe, look, decide. Then she walked to her truck, pulled a collapsible water dish from the emergency kit in her back seat, filled it from the large water jug she kept behind the passenger seat, and walked toward the dog. She kept her posture low, her hands visible, her approach oblique. She set the dish down at the edge of his chain reach and stepped back. He watched her for a moment that stretched itself long and thin. Then he moved to the water and drank. "Hey!" The voice came from the corner of the building. A man in a tan deputy's uniform, early 40s, carrying about 30 pounds more than the uniform was designed for. He had a wide, flat face and the kind of sunburn that comes from standing outside in authority rather than working in it. His hand rested on his belt above the holster with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned that gesture in a movie and never updated it. "That your water?" he said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Nobody gave you permission to be back here." "I'm on the other side of the property line," she said, "and I'm giving a dehydrated animal water. If there's a law against that in Delray County, I'd like to see it in writing." The deputy's expression shifted, not quite to anger yet, more to the particular variety of surprise men like him experience when a woman doesn't immediately recalibrate her tone downward. He came around the corner fully, thumbs in his belt now, the full performance. "You don't know whose dog that is," he said. I know he's chained in the heat with an empty water bowl 4 feet from a water spigot, she said. I know he's underweight by approximately 20 pounds based on his frame structure. And I know that bowl didn't tip itself. The deputy looked at the bowl, then at her. You a vet or something? Nurse, she said. But anatomy is anatomy. His name, she'd learn later, was Harlan Voss. Deputy Harlan Voss of the Delray County Sheriff's Department, and he had been using that title and that badge and that particular posture to manage this particular town for 9 years with a success rate that would have impressed a medieval feudal lord. He decided things. People accepted them. The machine ran quietly. Dog's not your concern, Voss said. You pump your gas and get moving. Who does he belong to? Something moved across his face then. Something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite guilt, but was the third thing that lives between them. He belonged to a family that's not here anymore, he said. Now he's county property. Now go pump your gas. Evelyn looked at the dog. The dog was still drinking, but one ear had rotated toward Voss with the kind of involuntary precision that comes from extensive conditioning, the body learning to track a threat even when the mind is doing something else. She pulled out her phone. What are you doing? Voss said. It wasn't a question. Noting the date and time, she said, My truck has a dash camera, front and rear. It's been running since I pulled in. I want to make sure I have accurate documentation for the timestamp. The pause that followed lasted about 4 seconds. 4 seconds in which Harlan Voss processed the information, ran it against his standard operating procedure, and found that his standard operating procedure had not prepared him for this specific configuration of events. You're documenting a parking lot, he said. I'm documenting a dog in distress, a tipped water bowl, and a law enforcement officer who appears to have been responsible for that condition, she said. Is there something else you'd like me to note? Lady. He took a step toward her. Not a threatening step. Not quite. More the kind of step designed to remind her of the difference in their physical presence. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you don't understand how things work here. I understand how things work in most places, she said. Variations are usually minor. He stopped, stared at her. The sunburn on his neck went a shade darker. Name, he said. Evelyn Marsh. Where are you coming from, Evelyn Marsh? Ridgeline, before that Fort Dunmore. Something in his expression recalibrated slightly at that. Fort Dunmore being the location of one of the larger military installations in the region, and something in how she said it, flatly and without elaboration, being the kind of delivery that could mean nothing or could mean a great deal. You military, he said. Former. What branch? She looked at him for a moment before answering. Navy. He laughed. Not a full laugh, the abbreviated kind, the kind deployed specifically to diminish. Okay, Navy, he said. Here's how this goes. You get back in your truck. You finish your fuel. You head down Route 9 to wherever you're going, and you don't come back through Delray on purpose. The dog is county property. His condition is county business. And your documentation, he said the word with audible quotation marks around it, documents nothing actionable because you don't understand what you're looking at. Evelyn waited until he was done. Atlas, she said. The dog's head came up immediately, fully, ears forward, eyes on her with an attention that was startlingly alert for an animal in his condition. Voss's face changed. How do you know that dog's name? I read his tag, she said. It's visible from here. She watched him look at the dog's collar. She watched him realize the tag was, in fact, visible from her position. She watched him process that she had been observant enough to read it and composed enough to use it deliberately, and she watched him file all of that somewhere in the back of his mind where things went that he hadn't figured out what to do with yet. Pump your gas, he said. Last time. She didn't move. He needs food, water, a wound assessment on his left rear leg, and to be off that chain. Those aren't negotiable things. They're the difference between an animal in distress and animal cruelty, which is a criminal charge in this state. You threatening me? I'm describing the legal framework, she said. You can decide what to do with it. For a moment she thought he was going to escalate it right there in the parking lot, and she had already run the geometry, his distance, the angle, the concrete post behind her that she could use as a pivot point if needed. But Voss didn't escalate. He was the kind of man who understood that certain moves needed witnesses managed first. Get in your truck, he said, quietly now, which was worse. She looked at Atlas one more time. The dog was watching her with that same direct, assessing attention. Not frightened, not pleading, waiting. "I'll be back," she said. She wasn't sure if she was saying it to the dog or to Voss, maybe both. She pumped her fuel, paid inside, and as she pulled back onto Route 9, she called the Delray County animal control number she'd looked up while standing at the pump. The line rang 9 times and went to a voicemail that sounded like it hadn't been checked in months. She left a message anyway, detailed and specific, with timestamps, and then she called the county's non-emergency sheriff's line and left a second message reporting the animal cruelty concern to the office of the department whose deputy had just told her to mind her own business. She drove 11 miles down Route 9 before she pulled over. She sat in the truck with the engine idling and stared at the road. She had a clinic shift, 70 miles, patients waiting, a schedule that didn't accommodate detours, and a professional life that absolutely did not need complications with local law enforcement in a county she passed through twice a month. She thought about the dog's eyes, the ear rotating toward Voss with that terrible trained precision. She pulled a U-turn on Route 9 and headed back to Delray. The gas station looked different on the return, smaller, the way places do when you've had time to think about them. She pulled into the lot and parked at the far end, away from the pumps. Through the rear camera screen on her console, she could see the back of the property. Atlas was still chained. Voss's cruiser was still parked at the side of the building. She got out and went inside the station. The man behind the counter was 50s, weathered in that specific rural Texas way, with hands that looked like they'd been put through a lot and a face that had learned to express very little. His name tag said Gerald. He looked at Evelyn when she came in, and then quickly looked at something else. "You remember me?" she said. "I was here maybe 40 minutes ago, pump 3. "I remember," Gerald said. He was looking at the lottery ticket display. "The dog out back," she said. "Atlas. How long has he been chained there?" Gerald's hands moved to the counter and stopped there. "Ma'am, I'm not going to use your name. I'm not recording this. I'm a nurse passing through, and I'm trying to understand the situation." The silence lasted long enough that she began to think he wasn't going to answer. Then, "About 3 weeks," he said. "Maybe a little more." "The family he belonged to?" Gerald's jaw tightened. "Gone." "What does that mean?" He looked at her directly for the first time. "It means gone," he said. "Means you should probably keep moving." "Who were they?" Another silence. Behind him, a small TV mounted on the wall above the cigarette display was running a local news broadcast with the sound off. A city council meeting. Faces she didn't recognize. "Name was Prieto," Gerald said finally. "Miguel and Sandra. Had a daughter, maybe 12. They were here. Miguel worked a property about 2 miles east. Then about 3 weeks ago, they just weren't. House was empty. Dog was left behind." "And Voss took the dog." Gerald's expression shifted. Something compressed in it. Something careful and old. "Deputy Voss made sure the dog was secured," he said. "That's how it was described." "Secured," she repeated. "Look, lady," he said quietly, "I don't know who you are or what you think you can do, but Harlan Voss has been running this town since before you knew what Delray County was. And the people who thought they could walk in and change that—" He stopped. "What happened to them?" He shook his head. Not a refusal. More the gesture of a man who'd decided some sentences shouldn't be finished out loud. Evelyn bought a bottle of water she didn't need, thanked him, and walked back outside. She sat in her truck and opened her laptop, connecting her phone's hotspot. She pulled up the Delray County property records, which were publicly accessible, and found the listing for the property address Gerald had described, a rental parcel about 2 miles east on County Road 7. The listed tenant contact for the past 3 years was a Miguel Prieto. No forwarding address, no lease termination on file. She searched Miguel Prieto, Delray County. Nothing in local news. She searched the name alongside the county's court records database, which was clunkier to navigate but eventually yielded something. A civil matter from 14 months ago in which a Miguel Prieto had filed a complaint against the Delray County Sheriff's Department alleging harassment and unlawful entry. The case number was there. The filing date was there. The status field said, "Withdrawn by petitioner." She leaned back in her seat. Withdrawn. Not dismissed. Not ruled upon. Withdrawn. which could mean the petitioner had changed their mind or been paid off or been scared off or had simply disappeared from the county without completing the paperwork. She thought about what Gerald hadn't said, about how he'd looked at the TV rather than at her, about the particular kind of silence that lives in towns where certain things have been true for long enough that people stop naming them. Then someone tapped on her passenger window. She didn't startle. She'd seen him coming in her side mirror, which meant she'd already assessed him as low immediate threat, and her hand had moved to the door handle rather than anywhere else. She rolled the window down. The man was early 60s, slight build, deep-set eyes under a ball cap that said Delray Feed and Ranch. He wasn't looking at her directly. He was looking at a spot slightly past her shoulder, the way people look when they don't want to be seen looking. "You the one who was talking to Voss," he said. Not a question. "Yes," she said. "He know you came back?" "Probably will soon." He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that. "I saw you inside talking to Gerald." A pause. "You from the county?" "No." "State?" "No, I'm a nurse. I was passing through." Something moved across his face. Maybe disappointment, maybe calculation, maybe both. "So you don't have any—" He stopped. "You're not here officially." "No," she said, "but I have a working phone and a camera system, and I'm having a very bad morning for my scheduled plans." She looked at him steadily. "What did you want to tell me?" He was quiet for a long moment. Down at the far pump, a truck had pulled in, someone in work clothes, not paying attention to them. "Prieto filed a complaint," the man said, "last year, about what Voss and his people were doing on the east properties. There was a whole situation, parcels being sold wrong, people moved off land they'd worked 15 years. Prieto had paperwork. A lot of paperwork." He paused again. "About 3 weeks ago, Voss showed up at his house. 2 days later, the family was gone. Dog was chained out back of the station, and Voss told everybody that if they had questions about Miguel Prieto, they should ask the dog." Evelyn was very still. "He said that. In front of 5 people, at the diner on Route 9. Said it like it was a joke." The man's voice was flat and without inflection. "It was not a joke." "Do you have any of the paperwork Prieto filed, the documentation?" "Prieto gave copies to 2 people in town before he disappeared. I'm one of them." He finally looked at her directly. "I've been carrying it for 3 weeks trying to figure out who to give it to that Voss couldn't reach." Evelyn picked up her phone and checked the time. She had a clinic shift she was now definitely missing. She had a voicemail to leave and no longer had any uncertainty about what she was going to spend the rest of this day doing. "What's your name?" she said. "Rather not say yet," he said. "No offense." "None taken. I'm Evelyn Marsh, She extended her hand through the window. He shook it once, quickly. "You can call me Marsh. Everybody does." "All right, Marsh. Here's what I need you to do," she said. "Go home. Don't go anywhere Voss could reasonably expect you to be in the next few hours. Photograph every page of that paperwork on your phone and send it to this address." She wrote her secure email on the back of her clinic business card, the card that listed her name, her title, and her hospital affiliation, but not, notably, everything she'd done before nursing school. "And don't tell anyone you talked to me." He looked at the card, read it, looked up. "You're a nurse," he said. "What exactly are you planning to do?" "Right now," she said. "Feed a dog." She started the truck. "But I've done harder things." She did not, in fact, get back to Atlas immediately, because as she pulled around to the back of the property, she found Harlan Voss standing there with a second person, a younger deputy, narrow-faced, who stood slightly behind Voss with the alert readiness of someone who'd been told to be present and ready, but not to speak. Voss had a fast food bag in one hand that he was eating from without urgency, watching her pull in. She parked, got out, walked toward them. "Figured you'd be back," Voss said. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Couldn't help yourself." "Water bowl's still empty," she said. "Dog's fine," Voss said. "Dog is not fine," she said. "His left rear leg has a wound that appears infected. His weight suggests he's been significantly underfed for at least 2 weeks. His water bowl is empty in 84-degree heat. I've documented all of this." "You keep saying that," Voss said. "Documented, like it means something." "It means I have footage of this animal's condition with timestamps," she said. It means I have your voice on camera telling me to leave when I was attempting to provide emergency care to an animal in distress. It means that when I file the complaint, which I'm going to do today, with the State Animal Welfare Board, the County Animal Control Oversight Committee, and the Texas Rangers District Office, there's a complete factual record. The younger deputy shifted his weight. Voss didn't move. Texas Rangers, Voss said and smiled. That's real cute. They have a field office in Carver City, she said. About 45 minutes from here. I have the duty officer's number. She did. She'd looked up while sitting in the parking lot. The smile stayed on Voss's face, but it had gone flat behind the eyes. He took another bite of his fast food and chewed slowly. It was a performance. She recognized it. The deliberate slowness designed to communicate that her presence was not affecting his pace or comfort. She'd seen the same performance from a colonel in Bahrain who turned out to be a lot more rattled than he looked. You said you were Navy, he said. Yes. What'd you do in the Navy? She looked at him. Medical, she said. Just medical. Is there a version of that you're hoping for? She said. He stepped toward her, closer than before, close enough that he was clearly inside what most people considered comfortable conversational distance. The younger deputy watched. She didn't step back. Here's what's going to happen, Voss said quietly. You're going to get in your truck. You're going to drive to Sutter Falls or wherever you're going, and you're not going to file anything with anybody because there is nothing to file. This is a county asset on county property, and its condition is within acceptable parameters. You have a camera. It recorded you pouring water for a dog. That's the whole story. She held eye contact. Is Miguel Prieto safe? She said. The silence that followed had weight. Voss's expression didn't change, not obviously, but something behind it did. Something in the calibration, the micro-timing of his blink rate. She'd spent years reading faces under pressure in environments where reading them correctly was the difference between a good outcome and a catastrophic one. And what she read now was not the confidence of a man on firm ground. It was the performance of one. I don't know what you think you're playing at, Voss said. I'm not playing, she said. That's the difference between us. I was still looking at her when his radio crackled. Dispatch. A call from County Road 7. A fender bender. The other deputy needed. Voss didn't look at the radio. He kept looking at her. Then he turned and walked to the cruiser. The younger deputy followed. Voss stopped at the driver's door. Marsh, he said. He'd remembered her name. She noted that. Small county. I'll remember your plates. I know, she said. She watched the cruiser pull out and turn east on Route 9. She gave it 90 seconds. Then she went to Atlas. The dog watched her approach with those steady amber eyes. She kept her movements slow and low. Hands out, no sudden gestures, voice below conversational. She sat down on the concrete about 4 feet from him. Just sat there. Didn't reach for him. Hey, buddy, she said quietly. I'm not going anywhere. He watched her for a long time. Then, slowly, he lowered himself onto the concrete too. She reached into her kit and pulled out a protein-dense nutrition pack she kept for long shifts. The kind of dense, high-calorie food that was terrible for a human breakfast, but excellent for a malnourished animal. She opened it and held it out. He smelled it from where he lay. His nose worked for a moment. He didn't come to her, but he didn't pull away either. I know, she said. It's hard to know who to trust. She set the food at the edge of his reach and sat back. While he ate, moving slowly and with the careful deliberateness of an animal whose hunger was fierce but whose instincts were still intact, she made 3 calls. The first was to the clinic in Sutter Falls, where she told the charge nurse she had an emergency situation and would not be in for her shift. The charge nurse sighed. Evelyn apologized and meant it. The second was to a number she'd memorized years ago and never deleted, which rang 4 times before a voice she recognized immediately said, Marsh, it's been a while. Warren, she said, I need some information. Warren Tibbs had been her intelligence liaison during her last 2 deployments, a man who had a gift for finding official records that were technically public but practically invisible unless you knew where to look. He'd left the service 2 years before she did, and now did something vaguely described as consulting for an organization that didn't have a website. What kind of information? He said. Delray County, Texas, she said. Sheriff's Department, specifically a Deputy Harlan Voss. Land records, civil complaints, any federal flags. And a family named Prieto. Miguel and Sandra, possibly a juvenile daughter. 3 weeks ago, they appear to have vacated their rental property without leaving a forwarding address immediately following a civil complaint withdrawal. A pause. Marsh, Warren said. Where are you? Delray County gas station parking lot. Of course you are. She could hear him already typing. Give me 6 hours. I might need less than that, she said. Marsh. Warren. Are you going to do something before you know what you're walking into? She looked at Atlas, who had finished eating and was now sitting up, watching her again with those steady eyes. I'm already in it, she said. The third call she made was to a number she'd looked up in the car, the office of the county clerk's court records division, who confirmed that yes, a civil complaint under case number Delray 2024 CV 1847, filed by a Miguel Prieto against the Delray County Sheriff's Department, had been withdrawn, but that the original filing documents were part of the public record and could be accessed in person during business hours or via written request. She wrote down the case number. She was still writing when she heard the cruiser coming back. It wasn't the same cruiser. It was a second one, black and white rather than the tan and brown of Voss's vehicle, and it pulled into the back lot slowly, and the man who stepped out was older than Voss, heavier, and wearing the different insignia of a senior officer. His shirt had the star pin of a department lieutenant. He walked toward her without hurrying. His face was the careful kind, the face of someone who'd learned long ago that showing what he was thinking was always a tactical mistake. Evelyn Marsh, he said. Yes, she said. Lieutenant Dale Orbach, Delray County. He stopped about 10 feet from her, hands clasped in front of him rather than on his belt, which was either a de-escalation signal or a calculated choice to look like one. Understand you've had a little situation with one of my deputies. I wouldn't call it a situation, she said. I observed an animal in distress, and I documented it. He looked at Atlas, then at the food wrapper near her hand. You feeding him? Yes. Animals county property, he said. You know that. I know Deputy Voss said that. I'd like to see the documentation that officially transferred a private citizen's registered K-9 to county custody. It's a reasonable request. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she recognized, the look of a man recalculating, quietly, in real time. Deputy Voss says you mentioned the Texas Rangers, he said. I did, she said. I have their number. Ma'am, he said, I understand you're concerned about the dog. I can see that. But you're new to this county and you don't have the context for the situation. The Prieto family left voluntarily. The animal was abandoned on what amounts to county-managed property. Deputy Voss ensured it was secured. That's the beginning and end of it. The beginning and end of it, she said slowly. What about the civil complaint? A very small silence. That matter was resolved. It was withdrawn, she said. Those aren't the same thing. Something shifted in his jaw. He was good, better than Voss. But she had years of reading people in very unforgiving environments, and what she saw in Dale Orbach's face was the specific look of a man who had managed something he considered manageable until this moment. Ms. Marsh, he said, I'm going to be direct with you. You're a nurse passing through. You've gotten involved in something that looks simpler from the outside than it is. And I genuinely encourage you to let the professionals handle the parts that are professional matters. He paused. There are aspects of this situation that are under active review. I can't discuss them. But if you were to file complaints and contact external agencies, you could potentially interfere with an ongoing process. Ongoing review by whom? She said. He didn't answer that. Lieutenant Orbach, she said, I want to ask you one question, and I'd like an honest answer. Is Miguel Prieto safe? The pause this time lasted just slightly too long. That's not something I'm in a position to address, he said. She stood up. Her knees were stiff from the concrete. She gathered her kit and looked at Atlas one more time. He was sitting upright, watching the lieutenant with that same careful ear tracking she'd noticed with Voss. The involuntary threat response built by weeks of conditioning. I'll be filing my concerns with the State Board today, she said. I'll include everything I've documented. I'll note that I spoke with yourself and Deputy Voss, and that the department's response was to characterize the animal's condition as within acceptable parameters. She looked at Orbach. I'll also note the timeline discrepancy between the Prieto civil complaint and their subsequent disappearance from the county. I think the people reviewing the filing will find that sequence interesting. She walked past him, back to her truck. She half expected him to call after her. He didn't. She sat in the driver's seat and looked at her phone. 6 messages from the clinic. A text from Warren Tibbs that said only, "Initial pull is interesting. Stand by." She took a slow breath and looked at herself in the rearview mirror. 43 years old. Dark circles under her eyes from a week of inconsistent sleep. Hair that hadn't been cut since February. She'd driven into this gas station at 7:40 in the morning, wanting fuel and a granola bar, and now it was 11:15 and she was parked at the edge of a small-town corruption situation that involved a missing family, a chained German shepherd, and a department lieutenant who couldn't answer a direct question about a private citizen's safety. Her hands were steady on the wheel. They had been steady in worse situations than this, and she'd known going in that this day was going to get much harder before it got better. She picked up her phone and dialed Warren Tibbs back. He answered on the first ring. "Marsh," he said, and his voice had shifted slightly. Still controlled, but carrying that particular weight it got when the information was significant. "You need to hear what I'm about to tell you, and then you need to be very careful about what you do next." "Go ahead," she said. "Harlan Voss has 3 federal complaints on file that never went anywhere," Warren said. 2 for civil rights violations, 1 for evidence tampering. All 3 were filed by different complainants in a 14-month window. All 3 were subsequently withdrawn. The pattern on the withdrawals is identical to what you described on the Prieto complaint. Active filing, then sudden withdrawal, no explanation. She was quiet for a moment. "Is there a federal investigation?" "That's the part that's interesting," Warren said. "There was. 18 months ago, the FBI's Civil Rights Division opened a preliminary inquiry into Delray County. It was assigned, it was active, and then 6 months ago it went quiet. Not closed, quiet. No public record of closure, no outcomes posted, just silence." She stared at the windshield. "Why would a federal inquiry go quiet without closing?" "2 reasons that I know of," Warren said. "Witness problems, or they're not done and they're keeping it dark." "You can't tell which." "Not from where I'm sitting," he said. "But Marsh, if they're still active, you walking into this could blow their timeline," she said. "I know." "So." She watched a truck pull past on Route 9. "I need a contact," she said. "Someone at the FBI field office in Carver City or Austin. Not a cold call. Someone with reason to take a call from me seriously." Warren was quiet for a moment. "I know someone at the Austin field office," he said carefully. "But Marsh, if you're going to make that call, you need to do it right. You need to tell them what you are, all of it, not just the nurse part." She'd been avoiding that. Not out of shame, just out of the genuine logistical preference for not leading with a credential that changed every conversation she had in ways she didn't always want. "I know," she said. "Because a nurse calling about a chained dog is a concern," Warren said. "But a former Navy SEAL combat medic with 12 years attached to reconnaissance and recovery operations, calling about a missing family and a compromised civil complaint in a county with 3 suppressed federal violations." He paused. "That's a different call." She looked at Atlas through the rear window of the truck. He was still sitting upright in the heat, watching the space she'd occupied on the concrete. "Get me the contact," she said. Warren texted it to her 40 seconds later. She dialed. The line rang twice. Then a woman's voice, businesslike, unhurried. "Special Agent Diane Reeves." "Agent Reeves," Evelyn said. "My name is Evelyn Marsh. I was a Navy SEAL attached to DevGru recovery operations from 2004 to 2016. I'm currently working as a civilian trauma nurse. I'm sitting in a gas station parking lot in Delray County, Texas, and I have documentation related to what I believe may be an active federal matter involving the county sheriff's department." A beat. "I think you need to hear what I have." The pause on the other end was brief, professional. "Tell me where you are exactly," Reeves said, "and don't move." Outside, the heat pressed down on the flat scrubland. The chain behind the station held Atlas to his post, and somewhere on County Road 7, a house sat empty where a family had lived 3 weeks ago, and nobody in Delray County was saying where they'd gone. Evelyn Marsh wasn't leaving until she found out. Special Agent Diane Reeves arrived in an unmarked charcoal sedan that had government plates so deliberately nondescript they were almost conspicuous, pulling into the Delray County gas and supply lot at 12:47 in the afternoon, with a second vehicle trailing close behind. A dark SUV with tinted windows that parked at the far end, without anyone getting out of it immediately, which Evelyn noted and filed. Reeves was mid-40s, compact build, dark haircut close, wearing civilian clothes that fit well enough to be intentional. She moved across the parking lot with the kind of efficiency that had nothing to do with hurrying and everything to do with not wasting motion. She shook Evelyn's hand once, firmly, and got right to it. "You said you have documentation," Reeves said. "Dash cam footage from this morning, time-stamped. The animal's condition, Deputy Voss's statements, the interaction." Evelyn handed over a USB drive she'd pulled from her truck's camera system. "I also have a case number for the withdrawn civil complaint filed by Miguel Prieto against the department 14 months ago. And I have a contact in town who says he has copies of Prieto's original documentation, the paperwork behind the complaint." Reeves looked at the USB drive. "You pulled this yourself?" "Yes." "You understand that depending on how this develops, chain of custody on evidence." "I'm not trying to build a case," Evelyn said. "I'm telling you what I have and what I saw. What you build from it is your job." Reeves studied her for a moment. Not the way most people studied her, sizing up the nurse, the civilian, but with a more calibrated attention. "Warren Tibbs vouched for you," she said, "which means something. He doesn't vouch. I know. He also said you'd probably already done 3 things I would have told you not to do." "2," Evelyn said. "The third I decided against." Something almost like a smile moved across Reeves's face and departed without fully arriving. "Walk me through the morning." Evelyn did. She was precise and linear about it, the way she'd been trained to debrief. Time, location, observation, action, result. In that order, without editorializing. It took 9 minutes. Reeves listened without writing anything down, which was either because she had a very good memory or because she was recording. Possibly both. When Evelyn finished, Reeves was quiet for a moment. She looked at the back of the property where Atlas was visible at the end of his chain, sitting in the partial shade of the fence. "How long has the dog been there?" "Station owner inside says about 3 weeks, consistent with the Prieto family's disappearance timeline." "You spoke to the station owner?" "Briefly. He was careful about it." Reeves nodded. "Gerald Soto," she said. Not a question. Evelyn registered that. Reeves knew his name, which meant she knew this station, this county, this situation, had known it before Evelyn called, which meant Warren's other possibility was the right one. The inquiry hadn't gone quiet because it was dead. It had gone quiet because it was still moving, underground, in the particular way federal investigations moved when they were trying not to spook something before it was ready to be spooked. "I may have complicated your timeline," Evelyn said. "You moved faster than we expected," Reeves said carefully. "But the situation with the Prieto family changed the calculus 2 days ago. We were already accelerating." "Where's the family?" Reeves looked at her. "That's not something I can share." "Are they safe?" A pause that was shorter than the ones she'd gotten from Voss and Orbach. "Yes," Reeves said. "They're safe." Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't quite realized she'd been holding at full pressure. "The documentation Prieto gathered," she said. "The land records, the complaints. Someone in town has copies. I told him to photograph everything and send it to my secure email." "Who?" "He didn't give me his name. He was cautious. Older man, 60s, ball cap, Delray feed, and ranch." Reeves took out her phone and typed something. "I know who that is," she said. "We've been trying to make contact with him for 6 weeks. He's been too scared to respond." She looked up. "Apparently you're more approachable than we are." "I didn't show up in an unmarked federal vehicle." "Fair point." Reeves put her phone away. "Ms. Marsh, here's where we are. This investigation has been active for 8 months. Voss is one part of it, the visible part, the enforcement arm. What sits behind him is larger and involves financial crimes, land fraud, and at minimum 1 county official above the lieutenant level. We're at a point where we can move, but we need 2 things to do it cleanly." "The Prieto documentation," Evelyn said. 1. And a witness willing to testify on the record about specific incidents of intimidation." She paused. "Every potential witness we've identified has either left the county or become unresponsive." Evelyn thought about Gerald Soto and his careful silences. About the man in the ball cap who'd been carrying paperwork for 3 weeks with no one to give it to. About Harlan Voss saying, "Ask the dog," in front of 5 people, like a man who believed completely that there was nothing and no one that could touch him. "What do you need from me?" she said. Reeves looked at her steadily. "Officially, nothing. You're a civilian. This is a federal investigation, and civilian involvement creates liability exposure." "And unofficially?" "Unofficially, you've made more progress in 4 hours than we have in 6 weeks, because you walked in without a badge and sat down on a gas station parking lot and gave a dog water." She paused. "There's a reason people respond to that differently than they respond to us." Evelyn understood what she wasn't being asked directly, but was being offered the space to volunteer. She'd been here before, not in this county, not with this specific configuration of corruption, but in the structural situation of being the person in the room who wasn't officially supposed to be solving the problem, but who had the particular combination of skills and access that made her the most practical option for solving it. She'd said yes before, under considerably higher stakes. She'd also learned what it cost. "The man with the documents," she said. "If I can get him to a place you can reach him, would that be enough?" "That and confirmation of what's in the documents," Reeves said. "We've been working from second-hand accounts. If Prieto's records show what our other sources suggest they show, we can move on Voss and Orbach within 48 hours. Orbach is involved." "Orbach manages Voss," Reeves said simply. "Has for years." Evelyn looked at the gas station. Through the window, she could see Gerald behind the counter, a shadow behind glass, being careful and quiet in his small space. She looked at Atlas, who was watching the federal SUV with the same tracking attention he gave everything that moved. "I need one thing," she said. "What?" She nodded toward the back of the property. "When this is done, and I mean done, not ongoing, he gets proper care. Veterinary assessment, treatment, and placement with someone appropriate. Not county shelter, not a holding facility. Actual care." Reeves followed her gaze. "That's an unusual condition." "It's a non-negotiable one," Evelyn said. Reeves looked at the dog for a moment. "I can make that happen," she said. "Personally." "Then I'll talk to your witness," Evelyn said. The man's name was Rufus Calloway, and he did not want to be found at his house, his truck, or anywhere adjacent to his normal routine. So Evelyn called the number he hadn't given her. She'd read it off his truck's registration sticker while they talked, a habit she'd never quite dropped from the years when knowing the way out was the same as staying alive. He answered after 5 rings, voice low and tight. "It's Marsh," she said, "the nurse from the gas station." "I know who it is," he said. "I don't have much time to talk right now." "You don't have to talk. I need you to meet me in 2 hours at the Ridgeline Diner on Route 9, east side of the overpass. Come from the county road, not the highway. Don't park in the lot." A silence. Who else is going to be there? She thought about how to answer that. "People who can actually do something with what you've been carrying," she said. Another silence, longer. "They federal?" "Yes." The pause that followed was the kind that contained an entire internal argument conducted in silence. She waited it out. 2 hours, he said. Then the line went dead. She relayed the arrangement to Reeves, who looked at the location and made a quiet call on her own phone. 2 minutes later, she said, "We have an agent who can be there. Not me. My face is known in this county. Someone Voss hasn't seen." "Does Voss know about the federal inquiry?" "He knows there was preliminary interest 18 months ago," Reeves said. "He thinks it closed. We let him think that." She paused. "Orbach is more careful. He suspected something has stayed active, which is why things have been quiet for the last 6 months. He's been managing Voss, keeping the visible incidents down." "Except for the dog," Evelyn said. Reeves's expression shifted slightly. "Except for the dog," she agreed, which was either arrogance or a message, probably both. They went over the logistics quickly. Evelyn would go to Ridgeline alone, meet Calloway, make the introduction. Reeves's agent would arrive separately and conduct the formal meeting from there. It was a clean handoff, the kind that had plausible shape to it, no obvious federal footprint until the moment of contact. What they didn't account for, because they couldn't have, was Voss coming back before she left. The tan and brown cruiser pulled into the lot at 1:15, and Voss got out before it fully stopped, moving with a different energy than before. Faster, less performance, more purpose. He saw Reeves's sedan and stopped. The calculation on his face was visible and rapid. He looked at Evelyn, at the sedan, at the SUV at the far end of the lot, then back at Evelyn. "Who is that?" he said. He was talking to her, but he wasn't really asking her. "I told you I was going to make calls," she said. Reeves had already moved slightly, not toward Voss, just repositioned, which was its own answer to his question. He looked at her and his jaw worked silently for a moment, and Evelyn watched him understand, in real time, that this had become something else. "You got no business being here," he said to Reeves. Reeves showed her credentials without a word, held them out flat, steady. Voss's face went through several things quickly. Anger, then something that might have been panic carefully managed, then the settling back into a hardened expression that she recognized as a man deciding he was going to brazen this out by sheer force of territorial certainty. "Whatever she told you," he said to Reeves, pointing at Evelyn, "you need to understand the context. She drove into this county this morning and started interfering with department business. She has no knowledge of—" "Deputy Voss," Reeves said. Her voice was calm and even and carried the specific register of authority that didn't need volume. "I'm not here in response to Ms. Marsh's call. I'd encourage you to think carefully about your next few statements." That stopped him. He heard what she didn't say, that she'd been here before, that her presence predated Evelyn's call, that whatever he thought the shape of this situation was, it was not the shape it appeared from where he was standing. "I want to call my union rep," he said. "That's your right," Reeves said. "You're not being detained or questioned. You're free to go." He didn't go. He stood there for a moment with his hand on his belt and looked at Evelyn with something that had passed through anger and come out the other side into a particular cold thing she recognized as a man filing information away for later. "This isn't over," he said to her. "It kind of is," she said. He got back in the cruiser and reversed out of the lot, slowly, deliberately, making sure they watched him leave. Reeves watched the cruiser until it was out of sight. "That's going to accelerate things," she said, with the tone of someone adjusting a calculation rather than being surprised by one. "How fast?" "He'll call Orbach in the next 10 minutes. Orbach will make a decision about their next move in the next hour." She pulled out her phone. "Which means your meeting in Ridgeline needs to happen faster than 2 hours." Evelyn was already moving toward her truck. "Tell your agent to be at the diner in 45 minutes, she said. She called Calloway as she pulled onto Route 9. He answered immediately this time, which meant he'd been sitting with the phone in his hand. "Change of timeline," she said. 45 minutes, same place." A beat. "Something happened." "Voss saw the federal vehicle," she said. "He doesn't know the scope of it yet, but he will soon." She heard him breathing on the other end. The sound of a man who'd been scared for a long time being asked to be less scared faster than he'd planned. "Calloway," she said. "The Prietos got out safe. The reason they got out safe is because the right people were already working this before I showed up this morning. I moved things faster, that's all. The work was already being done." Silence. "He really said that," Calloway said, "about asking the dog. In front of 5 people. I was one of those 5 people," he said quietly. "I didn't sleep right for a week after." "I know," she said. 45 minutes. The line went quiet. Then, "I'll be there." The Ridgeline Diner sat on the east side of an overpass on Route 9 in a location that served the specific demographic of long-haul drivers and people who needed to eat somewhere that wasn't the town they were leaving or the town they were going to. It had brown booths, fluorescent lighting, and coffee that had been cycling through the urn since before anyone could remember. And it was the kind of place where a woman sitting alone with a laptop drew less attention than 2 federal vehicles in a gas station parking lot. Evelyn got there in 38 minutes. She ordered coffee she wasn't going to drink and positioned herself in the corner booth with sightlines to both doors. She'd also, while driving, sent Warren Tibbs a text that said, "Need anything you can find on a Dale Orbach, Delray County Sheriff's Department, lieutenant rank. Specifically financial records, property ownership, any indicators of income inconsistent with county salary." Warren's response came back in 12 minutes, which was faster than she expected. Orbach owns 4 properties in Delray County under 3 different LLCs. 2 of those properties were acquired in the 18-month period following the land dispute complaints Prieto filed. One was sold 6 months ago at 340% of purchase price. "I'm going to need more coffee for this." She forwarded the text to Reeves's number. Reeves replied with, "We have this. Sending it to Austin tonight. Thank you." Q. Calloway came in 11 minutes later, entering from the back, which meant he'd parked on the county roadside as she'd told him. He was wearing a different cap, but the same worn expression, and he scanned the room before he moved toward her booth. She raised one hand to indicate her location, and he crossed to her without acknowledging anyone else. "Did you bring it?" she said. He put a padded envelope on the table. "Photographed and sent to your email before I left," he said. "That's the originals." She didn't open it. "Reeves's agent will take custody of that," she said, "and they'll want to talk to you, ask you to walk through what you know, when you knew it, what you saw directly." His hands were flat on the table and not entirely steady. "I didn't see anything directly. What I have is what Prieto gave me." "You saw Voss in the diner," she said. "You heard what he said about the dog." Calloway looked at the table. "I'm 63 years old," he said. "I've lived in this county my whole life. My daughter lives here. Her kids go to school here." He looked up. "You understand what it is I'm being asked to do?" "Yes," she said. "I do." "And you think it's worth it?" She thought about the easy answer and decided against it. "I think Voss is going to keep doing what he's been doing until someone stops him," she said. "He ran a family out of the county. He took their dog and chained him in a parking lot as a message to everyone watching. I think whether it's worth it is something only you can decide." He stared at his coffee cup. "My wife thinks I should have given this to someone months ago," he said. "She's been on me about it since the beginning." "Your wife sounds like she has good instincts." "She does," he said. "Terrible taste in men, but good instincts." It was the first human thing either of them had said that wasn't operational, and it landed in the space between them with some weight. Evelyn almost smiled. "The federal agent who's coming," she started. "Is that her?" Calloway was looking past her shoulder. She turned. A woman had entered from the front door, 30s, dark jacket, moving with that same economic efficiency as Reeves, but carrying it differently, less visible. She made eye contact with Evelyn from across the diner, and Evelyn gave a small nod. The agent, who introduced herself only as Pharaoh, sat across from them both and conducted the next 40 minutes with a precision that reminded Evelyn of the best intelligence debriefers she'd worked with. Not pushing, not leading, just creating the space for Calloway to put the information in order. He talked. Pharaoh listened and occasionally asked a question that was surgical in its specificity, the kind of question that can only be asked by someone who already knows the answer and is establishing confirmation rather than discovery. Evelyn sat to the side and drank the bad coffee and watched the dynamic. Calloway was nervous, but he was talking. The envelope sat on the table, and eventually Pharaoh took it and logged it formally, signing a receipt that she tore off and handed to Calloway like this was a transaction at a hardware store, which was the right call. The mundane gesture was more reassuring than any amount of formal language. When it was over, Pharaoh looked at Evelyn. "Agent Reeves wants you to check in with her before you leave the county," she said. "I'll go back to the gas station," Evelyn said. Pharaoh nodded. She stood, shook hands with Calloway, and left without looking back. Calloway sat for a moment with his coffee. "Now what happens?" he said. "Now they work," Evelyn said. "You go home. Be normal. Don't call anyone about this." "How long?" "I don't know," she said. She thought about what Reeves had said. 48 hours to move if the documents held up. "Not long." He nodded, put some bills on the table for the coffee, stood up, and tucked his chair in with the careful habit of a man who'd been taught manners by people who meant them. "Thank you," he said, "for being the one who stopped." She didn't have a clean answer to that. She gave him the honest one instead. "I stopped for the dog," she said. "The rest of it just followed." He left. She sat for another few minutes, ordering a piece of pie she didn't want because Gerald Soto's face kept coming back to her. The way he'd looked at the TV instead of at her, the way he'd said gone like the word was a bruise he'd learned to press carefully. There were other people in this county who'd been doing that for years. Looking at TVs, pressing bruises carefully. She thought about Orbach and his 4 properties under 3 LLCs. She thought about the preliminary federal inquiry that had gone quiet for 8 months, while Voss kept running his territory and Atlas sat chained in the heat. She paid for the pie and left. On. Reeves was still at the gas station when Evelyn returned, or rather she was in the parking lot of the auto parts store across Route 9, which had a direct sightline to the gas station entrance. She rolled the sedan window down when Evelyn pulled alongside. "Calloway talked," Evelyn said. "Farrow called," Reeves said. "Documents are solid, better than solid. There are transfer records in there that tie Orbach's LLC acquisitions directly to the families who were displaced." She paused. "This is enough. When do you move?" "Tonight we brief Austin. Tomorrow we get authorization." Reeves looked across the road at the gas station. 48 hours, give or take, possibly less." Evelyn looked at Atlas, visible at the end of his chain from here. Even across the road she could see the way he sat, upright despite everything, head up, ears still working. "I want to check his leg before I leave," she said. "The wound." "The property is technically county." "I know," Evelyn said. "I'm going to check it anyway." Reeves looked at her for a moment. "We don't have anyone watching the property tonight," she said. "Voss will know we don't." "Are you telling me that for my safety, or because you want me to know someone might come back?" "Both," Reeves said. "And I'm telling you it on the record so that anything you observe overnight has proper documentation." Evelyn understood what she wasn't being asked. "If I happen to be parked here overnight," she said, "my cameras are still running." "That would be your choice," Reeves said carefully. "Entirely. And if something happens that I document, anything documented by your system with proper timestamp would be admissible evidence," Reeves said, "especially given that you already established the recording context this morning." Evelyn looked at Atlas. She looked at the gas station, at Gerald Soto behind his glass, being careful and quiet. She looked at Route 9 heading east toward Carver City and the FBI field office, and 48 hours. "I'll need supplies," she said, "if I'm here overnight." "There's a convenience store 2 miles east," Reeves said. "I'll drive separately and meet you there in 20 minutes. It was not, Evelyn reflected, how she had planned to spend her Wednesday. She went to the convenience store. She bought water, 2 protein bars, a flashlight whose batteries turned out to be mostly dead, and a bag of low-sodium beef jerky. Reeves appeared 10 minutes after her, bought nothing, and stood at the end of the aisle with her hands in her jacket pockets. "The Austin office got the preliminary transmission," she said. "They're moving fast on the authorization. There's a wrinkle." Evelyn set the jerky on the counter. "What?" "The investigation has a second target beyond Voss and Orbach," Reeves said. "Someone at the county commissioner level. We've been building toward them for 6 months. The Prieto documents, if they show what Farrow says they show, give us the link we needed." She paused. "But the commissioner is also connected to a state-level figure, which means when we move, it could get loud." "How loud?" "Loud enough that it would be better if you were not the most visible civilian associated with this situation when it breaks." Evelyn paid for her supplies. "That sounds like you're telling me to leave." "I'm telling you that your role in this, which has been significant and genuinely useful, is going to be easiest for everyone if it stays at the level of documented civilian complaint rather than active collaboration with a federal investigation." She met Evelyn's eyes. "You understand the difference?" "Documented civilian complaint," Evelyn said. "Who happened to spend the night in a parking lot with a running camera?" "Because she was concerned about an animal's welfare," Reeves said, "which is a completely understandable reason. And if Voss comes back tonight, then your camera documents it," Reeves said, "and you call 911 and my direct line simultaneously, and you do not physically intervene. And if the dog needs immediate medical attention." Reeves looked at her steadily. "You're a nurse," she said. "I think you understand triage." It wasn't quite an answer, and they both knew it. It was the kind of operational non-answer that meant use your judgment, and we'll both figure out how to frame it afterward. She'd received that non-answer in other contexts, from other people, and she knew what it meant in practice. She went back to the gas station as the afternoon moved toward evening, parked at Pump 3 again, and told Gerald that she was concerned about the dog and intended to stay nearby for a while. Gerald looked at her for a long time without speaking, and then he said, "Coffee machine's on till 10, and went back to his lottery ticket display, and that was that. She checked Atlas's leg as the light went amber and long. The wound was a deep abrasion, probably from the chain or a fall on the concrete, and it had the early indicators of a bacterial infection, warmth, swelling, some discharge that had dried to a crust. She cleaned it as carefully as she could with what she had in her kit, and he let her, staying still with a discipline that was almost eerie, until she remembered that he was a trained working dog and had probably had more medical interventions in his career than most humans. "You were somebody's partner," she said quietly, working antiseptic into the wound with a sterile pad. "Before all this." He didn't make a sound, just watched her hands. "I know," she said. "Me too." She ate one of the protein bars in the truck as the sun went down. She ran the camera check on her system and confirmed everything was recording clean. She texted Warren Tibbs, "Staying at Delray overnight. Camera running. Keep your phone on." He replied, "Of course you are. Check in at 0600. At 9:47, Gerald came out the back door with a mug of coffee he handed to her through the truck window without a word, and she accepted it with equal wordlessness, and they understood each other completely. At 11:20, Harlan Voss came back. Not in his cruiser this time. In a personal truck, dark gray, no insignia, moving slow and lights off as it rolled into the back lot. Evelyn's rear camera picked it up at 112 meters, and she was already sitting upright before it crossed the property line. He parked, got out, walked to Atlas. She could see him on the camera screen. She could see the dog stand up and back to the end of his chain, ears flat, body language entirely different from anything she'd seen all day. She could hear faintly Voss's voice, too low to make out words, the cadence of something that was not reassurance. Her hand was on her phone, on Reeves's direct line. Then Voss reached up and disconnected the chain from the post. Not to release Atlas. She understood that immediately. He picked up the chain's free end and wrapped it twice around his fist and began walking toward the far fence, dragging Atlas behind him. And Atlas, to his credit and his tragedy, was not going quietly. The dog was braced and pulling back against the pressure, claws scraping concrete, and even through the camera audio, Evelyn could hear the sound of it. She called Reeves's line. It rang and rang. She was out of the truck before the fourth ring. She was moving across the lot before she'd made a conscious decision to move, operating on the math that said Voss had a head start of 40 feet, a chain, and whatever he was planning to do at the fence line, and that her camera was still running and time-stamping everything, and Reeves could be furious with her later. "Voss?" she said. He turned. In the ambient light from the station's back lamp, his face was a flat, unreadable thing. He had the chain in his fist and Atlas at the end of it, and he looked at Evelyn, and what crossed his face was not surprise. It was relief, like he'd been hoping she'd come. "I was wondering if you were still here," he said. Her phone rang in her hand, Reeves calling back, and she declined it without looking down. "Let the dog go," she said. "I don't think you understand your position," Voss said. "You're on county property after business hours. You've been interfering with a county asset all day, and now you're out here in the dark with no backup and no badge. And whatever you think those federal people are going to do, they're 25 miles away, and I know this county like I know my own hands." He gave the chain a short, hard pull. Atlas stumbled, caught himself, and stood, still not making a sound, just watching Evelyn with terrible patient attention. "My camera is recording this," she said. "Then it's recording a county officer securing a county asset," he said. "That's it. That's all it is. What it's not recording is whatever we say to each other out here in the dark, because there's no audio on those parking lot cameras that'll hold up at distance." He stepped toward her, chain in hand. "So let me say something very clearly. I know who called those federal people. I know who was in that diner today. And there are things in this county that a federal investigation does not fix, because a federal investigation takes 2 years, and I will still be here, and so will Dale, and so will everyone who has made this county work the way it works. And you, Evelyn Marsh." He took another step. "Close now. Close enough. You're going to get back in your truck," he said, "and drive away. Because the alternative is that you are an obstacle. And I have been removing obstacles in this county for 9 years. She looked at him, then at Atlas, then back at Voss. "You took the chain off the post," she said, her voice level, "which means he's no longer secured to county property." She met his eyes. "That makes him an unrestrained animal on a public access lot, which gives me the legal basis to take him into protective custody as a civilian with documented evidence of animal cruelty, and it gives you a criminal charge for obstructing that." Voss stared at her. "You've been telling me all day that I don't understand how things work here," she said. "But you walked out here tonight without your uniform, without your cruiser, without any of the authority you've been using as a shield, and you made a mistake that a tired man makes when he's desperate." She glanced at the camera above the back door, its red recording light steady in the dark. "You underestimated me." He moved, not toward Atlas, toward her. Fast and direct, and she was already turning, already using the geometry she'd mapped 6 hours ago, and the concrete post behind her was exactly where she'd calculated it would be. And Harlan Voss had 9 years of small-town authority and not nearly enough experience with people who'd spent 12 years in environments where this kind of miscalculation was fatal. She didn't hurt him badly. She didn't need to. He was on the ground, wrist at an angle that would hurt for a week but not break, and she was holding the chain, Atlas's chain, which Voss had dropped the moment she applied pressure. And Atlas was standing 3 feet away watching all of it with his ears forward. Her phone rang again. She answered it this time. "Marsh," Reeves's voice, tight. "My agent is 4 minutes out. What is your status?" "Voss is on the ground," she said. "I have the dog. And your camera has everything." A silence that lasted exactly 1 second. "4 minutes," Reeves said. "Don't move." She held the chain loosely in one hand and looked down at Voss, who was breathing through his nose with the deliberate control of a man managing pain and rage simultaneously. "You had a chance to be decent today," she said. "You had a lot of chances." He didn't answer. She turned to Atlas. The dog was standing at the end of the now slack chain, and he was looking at her, and she crouched down to his eye level the way she had that morning, hands open, posture low, and she waited to see what he would do. He walked to her. Not running, not tentative, just walked, deliberately, like a decision being made out loud, and put his nose against the back of her hand for a moment before he sat down beside her left leg, like he'd been there before, and intended to be there a while longer. Somewhere on Route 9, Reeves's agent was 3 minutes out, and somewhere in Austin, a federal authorization was being signed that would reach Delray County by morning. But on the concrete behind Delray County Gas and Supply, in the dark, with a deputy on the ground and a German shepherd pressed warm against her leg, Evelyn Marsh heard Voss shift position and knew, with complete certainty, that this was only the first thing he was going to try before it was over. Voss shifted again on the concrete, and Evelyn watched him without moving, one hand resting lightly on Atlas's back where the dog was pressed against her leg. The shift wasn't escape. His wrist was at the wrong angle for any serious movement, and he knew it. It was the particular restlessness of a man whose plan had failed, and who was now recalculating in real time, running options, and finding the inventory thin. She heard the vehicle before she saw the lights. One set of headlights coming fast on Route 9, then slowing, then the turn signal, then the crunch of gravel as it pulled into the back lot. A dark SUV, different from Reeves's, with a light bar that wasn't activated but was visible as a ridge across the roof. The agent who stepped out moved fast and without announcing herself in the way agents did when they'd been briefed on the situation and didn't need the theater of it. She was younger than Reeves, close-cropped hair, and she went to Voss first, not to help him up, but to position herself between him and Evelyn with the professional efficiency that said she'd read the scene in the 2 seconds it took her to cross the lot. "Deputy Voss," she said, "Agent Kira Nolan, FBI. I need you to stay where you are." "My wrist," he said. "I can see that." She looked at Evelyn. "What happened?" "He grabbed the chain and came at me," Evelyn said. "I redirected his momentum. He has a soft tissue injury to the right wrist. Probable sprain, unlikely fracture based on his grip strength when he went down. But he should have it checked." Nolan looked at her for a second. "You assessed the injury while you were taking him down." "I'm a nurse," Evelyn said. "It's a habit." Voss pushed himself to a sitting position with his good hand. His face was controlled now. The rage packed down, replaced with the strategic blankness of someone who had decided that everything he said from this point forward was going to an attorney first. "I want a lawyer," he said. "You're not under arrest," Nolan said. "At this moment, you're being detained for questioning following an incident that was captured on property surveillance." She glanced at the camera above the back door, its recording light steady. "We'll get to the rest." She made a call. Evelyn stood with Atlas and waited. Within 20 minutes, 2 more vehicles arrived. One a county sheriff's unit from the next district over, not Delray's, which meant someone had already made the call to pull jurisdiction. The second was a plain sedan carrying a man in civilian clothes who identified himself to Nolan as a representative from the Austin field office, who had driven the 45 minutes at a speed that suggested the authorization paperwork had come through faster than Reeves's 48-hour estimate. His name was Garrett Lowe, and he was the kind of federal attorney who wore his seriousness the way other men wore cologne, pervasively and without apparent self-awareness. He spoke to Nolan for 4 minutes beside his car, and then he looked across the lot at Evelyn Marsh standing with a German Shepherd in the dark, and something in his expression said he was reassessing a situation he thought he'd been briefed on completely. He walked over. "Miss Marsh," he said. "Yes." "Garrett Lowe, Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division." He paused. "You've had a full day." "It started out quieter," she said. He looked at Atlas, then back at her. "Agent Reeves briefed me on your background," he said. "All of it." A beat. "I want you to understand that your presence here has created some procedural complexity." "I've been told," she said. "What I also want you to understand," he said, "is that the materials Mr. Calloway provided, combined with your documented footage and the incident that just occurred on this property." He stopped, chose his next words with visible care. "We have enough. We've had enough since this afternoon. What happened here tonight with Voss makes it cleaner." "He came here on his own," she said, "in a personal vehicle, not in his official capacity." "Yes," Lowe said, "which means everything he did in the last 20 minutes is personal criminal conduct, not a gray area of official action." She understood. Voss, trying to intimidate her off the property on his own time, outside his official role, had stripped himself of every procedural defense that would have complicated a federal action against an on-duty officer. He'd done it because he was scared and because he thought he understood who she was and what she could do, and he'd been wrong on both counts. "What about Orbach?" she said. "Lieutenant Orbach is currently unreachable by his department," Lowe said, "as of approximately 90 minutes ago." He said it neutrally, but the meaning was clear. Orbach had been warned, or had sensed what was coming, and had moved. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "He's running." "We have reason to believe he's still in the county," Lowe said. "We have assets covering the primary exit routes." A pause. "We anticipated this possibility." "Did you anticipate him coming here first?" Lowe looked at her steadily. "No," he said. "That part was not anticipated." What happened next was the kind of controlled acceleration that federal operations produced when they stopped being quiet and started being fast. A machine that had been running underground suddenly surfacing and moving at full speed. By 2 in the morning, 3 more vehicles had arrived at the gas station lot. Gerald Soto came outside in a jacket pulled over pajamas and stood at the back door of his station watching, and no one told him to go inside because he wasn't in the way, and because he had earned the right to watch whatever was about to happen in the town he'd been careful in for 20 years. Evelyn stayed because no one told her to leave, and because Atlas was sitting beside her with his chain removed. Nolan had formally logged the chain removal as evidence and handed Evelyn a blue latex glove to hold the end without smudging anything. And neither of them commented on the fact that she was now de facto holding the dog's leash with a piece of evidence documentation. Reeves arrived at 2:15, driving herself, looking like someone who had not slept but had consumed enough coffee to address that biochemically. She went to Lowe first, then came to Evelyn. "Orbach," Evelyn said before Reeves could speak. "Working on it," Reeves said. "He's in the county. His personal vehicle pinged a cell tower on County Road 12 an hour ago." "County Road 12 goes east," Evelyn said. "Yes. There's a private airstrip about 8 miles east on 12. Small operations, agricultural supposedly." She knew this because she'd driven Route 9 through Delray County twice a month for 4 months, and she read maps the way other people read menus, completely and without effort, noting everything, because noting everything was a habit that had kept her alive in places where the alternative was not. "It's on the Harwick property, privately owned." Reeves looked at her. "How do you know about the Harwick airstrip?" "County property map," she said. "It's publicly listed. Harwick family has operated it for 30 years. Reeves's phone was already out. She moved away and was talking before Evelyn could hear the rest. Lowe appeared at Evelyn's shoulder. "The Harwick property," he said. "Is that something we should know about in relation to this investigation?" "The Harwick family name appears twice in Prieto's civil complaint," Evelyn said. "He alleged that 2 of the parcels involved in the displacement scheme were associated with a Harwick LLC. I read the documents on the drive out here." She paused. The county commissioner connected to your larger investigation? Is his name Harwick? Lowe was quiet for long enough to confirm it. Then Dale Orbach is not running east because he wants open highway, she said. He's running east because he thinks he has a way out through someone with a small plane and a reason to move him. Lowe was already walking back to his sedan. The operation that followed was not something Evelyn was part of. She was a civilian with a German Shepherd and a kit bag and a badly missed clinic shift. And the cars that went east on Route 9 toward County Road 12 carried people with jurisdiction and weapons, and the legal architecture to use both. She stayed in the gas station lot and sat on the tailgate of her truck with Atlas and Gerald Soto, who brought out 2 mugs of coffee at 3 in the morning without being asked and sat in a folding lawn chair he'd produced from somewhere inside the station. And they didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. You knew about the Harwick connection, she said after a while. Not accusing, just noting. I knew Harwick sold land to the county for above market twice in 3 years, Gerald said. I knew Orbach bought a property adjacent to the first parcel 6 months after. I knew that Miguel Prieto knew it too. He sipped his coffee. I also knew I had a gas station and a daughter in Beaumont and no interest in becoming an example. You talked to me, she said. You didn't come in a federal car, he said, and you gave my dog water. She looked at him. Your dog? Gerald was quiet for a moment. Atlas was with the Prietos when they moved here, he said. But he'd been mine first. I had him 3 years, and then I had a situation. Medical bills. Couldn't afford the food and the vet both, some months. Miguel offered to take him. He had a yard. He set his coffee mug on his knee. I used to come out back every day and check on him. When Voss chained him here, I couldn't... He stopped. I couldn't do much about it, but I could see him. The information settled over Evelyn with a weight she hadn't expected. She looked at Atlas, who was lying with his head on his paws between them, his eyes half closed in the particular way of working dogs who slept light. He's going to be okay, she said. I know, Gerald said. I could tell by how he looked at you. They sat in the dark and waited. At 4:47 in the morning, Reeves called. We have Orbach, she said. Evelyn let out a breath. At the airstrip. Commissioner Harwick was there with him, a pilot. The plane was fueled. Reeves's voice carried the specific flatness of someone reporting facts, while simultaneously managing a significant internal response to those facts. Orbach has been placed under arrest. Harwick is being detained pending charges. Voss has been formally arrested and is on his way to the county facility in Carver City. The rest of the department, Evelyn said, the ones who are running Voss's operations. The Austin office has been in contact with the state's attorney since midnight, Reeves said. There are 4 additional deputies who are persons of interest. They're being pulled in for questioning starting at 6 this morning. A pause. Marsh? Yes. What you did tonight, the incident with Voss, you need to give a formal statement. Today, before this goes any further, Nolan will take it. I know, she said, and the statement needs to be accurate and complete, including the part where you physically intervened. I'm aware of what accurate means. I know you are, Reeves said. I'm saying it anyway because there are going to be attorneys, his attorneys, who will look at every piece of this, and your use of force is going to be the thing they focus on. A deputy who was not in official capacity grabbed a chain and moved toward me on private property, Evelyn said. I used the minimum force necessary to prevent the assault and restrain him until federal agents arrived. I documented the wound assessment immediately and recommended medical evaluation. She paused. Is there a version of that story that's legally problematic? No, Reeves said, but there will be someone who tries to make it one. Then they'll have to do it on camera, Evelyn said. After the call, she sat for another hour on the tailgate. The sky went from black to the particular dark blue that came before first light, and the flat scrubland of Delray County emerged slowly from the dark with that quality that flat country had at dawn. Not beautiful exactly, more honest, everything visible, no place to hide anything. Gerald had gone inside to start the morning prep. Atlas was asleep against her thigh, heavy and warm, his breathing slow and even, in a way it probably hadn't been in weeks. She gave her statement to Nolan at 6:15 in the front seat of Nolan's SUV, with the recorder running and the morning coming in through the windshield. She was accurate and complete. It took 40 minutes. When she was done, Nolan closed her notebook and looked at her. Can I ask you something off the record? Yes. You drove into this county at 7:40 yesterday morning to get gas, Nolan said. You could have left, multiple times. You had a clinic shift, people waiting on you, an actual life somewhere else. She paused. What made you stay? Evelyn thought about the honest answer and decided it was also the simplest one. I've been in places where the people who could have done something didn't, she said. I know what that costs, not the people who did the harm. Them too, but that's not the part that stays with you. She looked at the gas station. It's the ones who could have helped and calculated that it wasn't worth it. Nolan was quiet for a moment. You were never just a nurse, were you? I'm absolutely a nurse, Evelyn said. I've been a nurse for 6 years and I'm good at it, and I intend to keep doing it. She paused. I'm also other things. Most people are. She slept for 3 hours in the truck in the gas station lot because she was too tired to drive safely, and she knew it. And when she woke up at 9:30, the lot had 3 additional federal vehicles and a white van marked with the county animal welfare logo that had been summoned, she would later learn, by Nolan at 6 in the morning based on a specific request forwarded from Reeves, based on a specific condition Evelyn had placed on her cooperation the previous day. The woman who stepped out of the animal welfare van was a veterinarian named Dr. Priya Osteen from the Carver City Large Animal Practice, and she moved with the particular confidence of someone who dealt with frightened and injured animals professionally and did not find the federal vehicle collection in the parking lot either surprising or intimidating. She introduced herself to Evelyn and crouched to Atlas's level and spent 4 minutes in a non-intrusive assessment before she said anything clinical. Infected wound left rear, she said. Muscle wasting consistent with 3 to 4 weeks of significant caloric restriction. I'm seeing some joint inflammation in the right front, probably from the chain positioning limiting natural movement. Dentition looks okay, which tells me he was well cared for before this. She looked up at Evelyn. He's going to need IV antibiotics, nutritional management, probably 2 to 3 weeks of monitored recovery. But there's no structural damage I can identify in the field that's going to be long-term. He's a working dog, Evelyn said. Former K9, I believe, based on his behavioral patterns. Osteen looked at Atlas with a different calibration. That tracks, she said. His pain tolerance is significant. He's been compensating for the leg for probably 10 days based on the muscle compensation pattern in his hip. She stood. I'll take him to the practice in Carver City. You want to ride with him? Evelyn looked at her truck. At Route 9. At the direction of Sutter Falls, where she had missed a full shift yesterday and had another one starting in 4 hours. I can't, she said. Osteen nodded and began preparing for transport. Evelyn crouched down to Atlas, who was watching her with those amber eyes. The same direct assessing attention as yesterday morning, except that yesterday morning it had been the careful attention of an animal deciding whether to trust, and now it was something else. I'll come to Carver City, she told him, as soon as I'm clear. He put his nose against her palm. One brief, deliberate contact. Then he turned and walked with Osteen toward the van, boarding it without hesitation, and lay down inside and watched her through the window as the doors closed. She drove to Sutter Falls. She was 45 minutes late for her shift, and the charge nurse looked at her with an expression that mixed relief and reproach in equal measure, and Evelyn said, I'll explain later. What do you have for me? And they went from there, which was how it needed to go. She worked 11 hours. At no point during those 11 hours did she stop tracking what was happening in Delray County, because she had her phone in her pocket, and Reeves sent updates at irregular intervals with the brevity of someone communicating between operations. Voss formally charged 10:15, and then at 2, Orbach charged, bail denied, and at 4:40, Commissioner Harwick press conference expected tomorrow morning, Austin AG involved. The last message came at 7:12, after her shift ended and she was sitting in her truck in the clinic parking lot with her forehead resting against the steering wheel. You should know. The Prieto family has been notified of the arrests. Miguel asked us to pass on that he wanted to thank the woman who stayed. She read that message twice. Then she started the truck and drove to Carver City. Dr. Osteen's practice was a low building on the south side of Carver City with good lighting and the specific smell of animal medicine that was antiseptic and hay, and something underneath that was just animal, and Atlas was in a recovery kennel in the back with an IV line and a clean bandage on his leg and his eyes open when she came in. He didn't stand up. The IV made that complicated, and Osteen had clearly told him to stay because he clearly understood instructions. But his ears came forward, and he watched her cross the room. "Hey, buddy," she said quietly. She sat on the floor beside the kennel door, back against the wall, her kit bag on her lap. She was still in her scrubs from the shift, and she had dried coffee on her left cuff from somewhere around hour 8, and her hair had given up its arrangement several hours ago. "You look terrible," Osteen said from the doorway, with the directness of someone who spent most of their time with animals, and had lost some of the social lubrication around honesty. "I feel worse than I look," Evelyn said. "There's a cot in the back office," Osteen said. "For late calls, you can use it." "I should get back to Ridgeline. I have a shift." "What time?" 7 a.m. Osteen looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:43 in the evening. "Ridgeline is 45 minutes from here," she said. "You can sleep 4 hours and still make it." Evelyn looked at Atlas, who was watching her with the particular patience of an animal who had recently decided that she was a constant and was prepared to wait her out. 4 hours, she said. She slept on the cot and dreamed of nothing, which was what her body always did when it was genuinely depleted. Not the restless, near sleep of stress, but the absolute flat darkness of a system that had gone offline completely. She woke at 3:40 to her phone alarm, lay still for a moment while her body took inventory, then got up. Atlas was still awake when she checked on him. She wasn't sure if he'd slept or had simply been lying in the dark with his eyes open, waiting. "I'll be back," she said, the same thing she'd said at the gas station. "That one, I mean." She drove back to Ridgeline on empty roads and was in the clinic at 6:50 with coffee from the drive-thru and a face that the overnight receptionist looked at with visible concern before deciding diplomatically not to comment. The shift was 12 hours. There was a cardiac event in the first hour that required the kind of focused response that left no room for anything else, and then a pediatric case that was complicated and resolved well after a long middle section where it might not have. And then a stretch in the afternoon where things slowed enough that she was able to sit in the break room and watch the news on the wall-mounted TV. Commissioner Harwick's arrest was on the regional news at noon. The segment was 4 minutes long and included footage from outside the Carver City Federal Building, Harwick's attorney making a statement about the charges being politically motivated, and a brief line from the Austin AG's office confirming that the investigation involved land fraud, civil rights violations, and criminal conspiracy charges across multiple defendants. The anchor mentioned a federal investigation that had been ongoing for nearly a year. She didn't mention Evelyn Marsh. She didn't mention a gas station or a German Shepherd or a woman who had pulled off Route 9 for fuel and ended up staying for 36 hours. That was fine. That was exactly as it should be. What she didn't know, couldn't know yet, was what Voss's attorney had filed in the Carver City Court at 11:15 that morning, because the filing wasn't public until 3 p.m., and by 3 p.m. she was back with a patient, and the message from Reeves that contained the information didn't come through until 4:20, during a brief window between a wound dressing change and a medication consult, when she was standing in the corridor with her phone. She read the message twice. Voss's defense attorney has filed a motion to suppress your dashcam footage on the grounds that you are acting as a de facto federal agent, and therefore the footage constitutes government-directed surveillance without proper warrant. They're also arguing your physical restraint of Voss constitutes unlawful detention by a federal contractor. A pause in the message, then, "It's not going to succeed, but it means you're being called to testify in the suppression hearing." Thursday morning, Carver City Federal Courthouse. "I'm sorry." She put her phone back in her pocket. She finished the wound dressing change. She went into the medication consult and was precise and clear and there for the patient in the way she needed to be. She went through the remaining 2 hours of her shift doing the work, because the work was what there was, and it was work she was good at, and the hearing on Thursday was Thursday. After her shift, she sat in the parking lot again. It was becoming a habit, sitting in parking lots, which she supposed said something about the last 48 hours, and called Reeves back. "Tell me about the attorney," she said. "His name is Stanford Wick," Reeves said. "He's out of Houston. He handles law enforcement defense cases, specifically cases involving federal civil rights allegations. He's good." "How good?" "He successfully suppressed body camera evidence in a case in Brazoria County 2 years ago by arguing the officer had been directed by a federal monitor," Reeves said. "The argument failed at the circuit level eventually, but it took 8 months, and by then the primary case had lost momentum. So the strategy is delay, Evelyn said. The strategy is create enough procedural chaos that Voss gets out on reduced bail and has enough time to… Reeves paused. We're not sure what the endgame is. Either he thinks he can make a deal, or he thinks there are still people in Delray County who can be pressured into changing their accounts. Calloway, Evelyn said. Calloway, and 2 others who agreed to provide witness statements this morning. Are they protected? Yes. But Marsh, the suppression motion, if it gets any traction, even temporarily, the footage from your camera is the cleanest single piece of evidence linking Voss's behavior to a pattern. Without it, we're working from Calloway's testimony and Prieto's documents, which are strong but are more easily attacked. Evelyn stared at the windshield. What do you need from me at the hearing? She said. Your honest testimony about why you were in that county and what you did and why you did it, Reeves said. Wick is going to try to establish that you were coordinating with us before you made any of those calls. That you were effectively working as an agent before you contacted us. I wasn't, she said. I know that. You know that. Wick is going to suggest that a former Navy SEAL with 12 years of intelligence-adjacent operations doesn't just happen to stop at a gas station and document a dog. She paused. He's going to argue that your background makes spontaneous civilian action implausible. My background, Evelyn said slowly, makes me exactly the kind of person who notices an animal in distress and doesn't look away. She was quiet for a moment. He can try to make that sound sinister. I'd be interested to see how it lands with a jury. It's a suppression hearing, Reeves said. No jury, just a judge. What judge? Federal Magistrate Ruth Albanese, Northern District of Texas. Evelyn made a mental note to find out everything there was to know about Ruth Albanese before Thursday morning. I'll be there, she said. She drove back to Carver City that evening because she was now going to be in Carver City on Thursday, and the math of driving back and forth didn't make sense, and because there was a dog in a recovery kennel she'd told she would come back to. Atlas's IV had been removed that afternoon, Osteen told her. He was taking solid food well, and the antibiotics were already showing effect on the wound inflammation. He'd be on oral medication for 10 days and needed controlled exercise, no running, short walks. But the prognosis was genuinely good. He waited for you, Osteen said, not sentimentally but as a clinical observation. Every time the back door opened, he looked up. Then when it wasn't you, he lay back down. Dogs do that, Evelyn said. They do, Osteen agreed, but not always after 3 weeks of what he's had. She looked at Evelyn over the kennel door. What's going to happen to him? I'm working on it, Evelyn said. He needs placement with someone who understands working dog psychology and has the patience for a recovery protocol. She was aware as she said it that she was describing herself, and that she had a 1-bedroom apartment in Ridgeline and a schedule that was not compatible with a dog who needed controlled exercise and medication management. She was also aware that she didn't currently care about any of that. She sat on the floor with her back against the kennel and her legs stretched out on the clean concrete, and Atlas lay on the other side of the wire with his head resting on his paws facing her. And she thought about Thursday and Stanford Wick and a federal magistrate she hadn't researched yet, and what it meant to have one's spontaneous civilian instincts characterized as implausible. She thought about Voss saying, "You don't understand how things work here." She thought about what it had cost the people in that county to understand how things worked there. Miguel Prieto, who had spent months gathering documentation and filed a complaint and then disappeared from the county with his family before his case was ever heard. Gerald Soto, who had watched Atlas from behind his station window for 3 weeks and said nothing because his daughter was in Beaumont and the math of survival wasn't simple. Rufus Calloway, who had carried an envelope of photographs for 6 weeks because he had the evidence and no one to give it to that Voss couldn't reach. She thought about what it meant to be the person who arrived from the outside, who didn't have a daughter in Beaumont, who didn't have a gas station on Route 9, who could look at the math of the situation and do the calculation from a position that wasn't already mortgaged to the outcome. She had been that person in other places. Environments where the stakes were calibrated differently, and the consequences of failure were not procedural, but mortal. She'd been good at it in those environments because she'd been trained to be good at it, and because she was, underneath the training, the kind of person who found the specific feeling of standing between harm and the people it was aimed at to be one of the clearer purposes she knew how to inhabit. Being that person in a gas station parking lot in Delray County felt smaller. It wasn't smaller. She knew it wasn't, but the scale of the action changed how it felt in the body. Atlas shifted position, tucking his nose under his paw. He exhaled slowly. She checked her email. 3 messages from Warren Tibbs at irregular hours. The first 2 were additional financial information on Orbach and Harwick that she forwarded to Reeves. The third, sent at 11 p.m., was shorter. You should know. I looked into Stanford Wick. He's taken 3 cases like this in the last 4 years. 2 of the people who testified against his clients had their records subpoenaed prior to hearings. In one case, prior military medical records. He'd added, at the end, "Not trying to worry you, just want you prepared." She sat with that for a moment. Her military records were not something she'd chosen to discuss publicly. They were not technically fully sealed. The operational details were classified, but the service record, the rank, the discharge classification, were part of a documentation trail that a determined attorney with subpoena power could access. And within that record were the things that went alongside 12 years of recovery operations. The 2 psychological evaluations required after critical incidents, both of which she'd passed but which existed, and which a skilled attorney could frame selectively in front of a federal magistrate trying to assess her credibility as a witness. She typed back, "I know, thank you." Then she leaned her head back against the kennel wire and closed her eyes. She was still sitting like that 20 minutes later, not quite asleep, when the back door of the veterinary practice opened and Austin came in with the expression of someone carrying news they hadn't chosen. "I just got a call from the county animal welfare coordinator," she said. "The one who officially transferred Atlas to my care this afternoon on the federal hold." Evelyn opened her eyes. "Voss's attorney filed a separate motion this afternoon," Osteen said, "arguing that Atlas's transfer to my care was procedurally invalid because the federal hold wasn't properly executed under Texas animal welfare statute, and that the dog is still technically in the custody of the Delray County Sheriff's Department pending the suppression hearing outcome." She paused. "If the hearing goes badly Thursday, if the motion has any traction, they could petition to have Atlas returned to county custody." The space in Evelyn's chest went cold and flat. "That's the leverage," she said. "Not a question." "The coordinator said Wick's office called her directly at 4:30 this afternoon," Osteen said. "The same day the charges were filed. She said he was," Osteen chose her word carefully, "informational about the situation. Like he wanted her to know the dog's status was in question." Evelyn stood up. Atlas had his eyes open again, watching her, reading something in the change in her body that she hadn't consciously expressed. Stanford Wick hadn't filed the motion about the dog because he thought he'd win it. He'd filed it because he wanted her to know the dog was on the table. He wanted her to walk into that hearing on Thursday carrying the specific weight of knowing that what happened to Atlas depended in part on how she performed under cross-examination. He'd looked at her background, sure, former SEAL, combat medic, 12 years of recovery operations, and he'd decided the way to manage her was not to outmaneuver her physically or legally, but to find the things she cared about and make it conditional. She looked at Atlas, then she picked up her phone and called Reeves. "I know," Reeves said before she could speak. "Nolan flagged it an hour ago. Is the hold valid?" "Our position is yes," Reeves said. "Wick's position is no. It will come down to Albanese's reading of the statute." A pause. "Marsh, he's doing this to destabilize you before the hearing." "I know what he's doing," she said. "I want to know what the actual legal risk to the dog is." Reeves was quiet for a moment that was a beat too long. "Tell me," Evelyn said. "If Albanese finds the federal hold procedurally invalid and orders the suppression of your footage," Reeves said carefully, "there is a scenario in which the Delray County Sheriff's Department, which still has 3 deputies who are persons of interest but not yet charged, could petition for Atlas's return to county custody pending a separate animal welfare proceeding." "A proceeding in a county court," Evelyn said, "in a county where Voss has operated for 9 years. "Yes," Reeves said, "and if that happens?" Another pause. "We'd fight it," Reeves said, "but the timeline, how long would the fight take?" The silence that followed was the answer. Evelyn stood in the back room of Osteen's practice with the fluorescent light humming above her and Atlas watching her from behind the kennel wire and the specific cold geometry of the situation absolutely clear to her. Stanford Wick had not filed that motion because he thought it would succeed. He'd filed it because if it even partially succeeded, if it introduced enough procedural uncertainty, There was a window, however narrow, where the wrong hands could reach back into Delray County and find the last thing this situation needed to be clean. She said nothing for a moment. "Thursday morning," she said finally. 8 a.m., Reeves said. "Albanese runs a tight courtroom. What time does Wick plan to call me?" "Based on the filing, he'll cross-examine you after the footage authentication. Probably mid-morning. I need everything you have on Albanese's prior rulings on civilian documentation," Evelyn said. "Specifically cases where non-law enforcement parties documented police conduct. And I need Wick's prior case files, anything public record, the ones Warren flagged." "I can have that to you by 10 tonight," Reeves said. "Send it to my secure email." She looked at Atlas. "And Reeves?" "Yes." "The Prieto family. Miguel specifically. Is there anything he can do from his current location that would help before Thursday?" A pause. "You mean testify?" "I mean submit a declaration," she said. "A formal witness statement about what Voss told him, what he was threatened with, why he withdrew the civil complaint. Even without him being physically present, a declaration would go to the substance of the case," Reeves said slowly. "Not the suppression motion specifically. Wick would argue it's not relevant to the footage authentication question." "It's not relevant to the footage question," Evelyn said. "It's relevant to Albanese's understanding of what kind of man Harlan Voss is and why a civilian nurse with a running camera was the difference between his conduct being documented and not." A long pause. "I'll make a call," Reeves said. Evelyn put her phone down. She looked at Atlas for a long moment, and he looked back at her with those steady amber eyes, and she thought about what she was going to say to Stanford Wick's questions on Thursday morning. She thought about the footage. 12 hours of dashboard camera, time-stamped and clean, running from the moment she pulled into Pump 3 at 7:40 a.m. until the moment Voss's attorney filed his motion to suppress it. 12 hours of a woman doing the thing that was in front of her to do, one step at a time, without a badge or a brief or a federal warrant. She thought about the look on Voss's face when he'd said, "You don't know who you're dealing with." She thought about how she'd answered him. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with." On Thursday morning, she was going to sit in a federal courtroom, and a very good attorney was going to try to make 12 years of her life into a reason to dismiss what she'd seen and what she'd done. And she was going to have to answer those questions precisely, on the record, in front of a magistrate whose ruling would determine whether Harlan Voss faced the full weight of the evidence against him or managed to carve out enough procedural cover to make himself harder to reach. She lay down on the floor of the recovery room beside the kennel, her kit bag under her head, and Atlas's nose came through the wire gap and rested against her temple. She was still awake at midnight, turning the questions over, when her phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. It was a single sentence. "We know where you're sleeping tonight, nurse." She read the message 3 times, not because she needed to read it 3 times, but because she was doing what she'd been trained to do. Slow down when the instinct was to accelerate, read the actual information rather than the emotional charge around it. The number was local, a 432 area code, which was Delray County and the surrounding region. The message was sent at 12:04 a.m. It was a threat, clearly, but it was also something more specific than a threat. It was information. Someone knew she was at Osteen's practice, which meant either they'd followed her, which she would have noticed, or they'd been told, which meant someone in the operational circle of the last 24 hours had a leak direction she hadn't accounted for. She forwarded the message to Reeves with a single line. Received 12:04. Local 432 number. Someone has my location. Then she texted Warren Tibbs. "Run this number, tonight if possible." She got up from the floor. Atlas raised his head. "Stay," she said quietly. She did a perimeter walk of Osteen's practice, all 4 exterior walls, checking sight lines, entry points, the parking situation on the street. The practice was on a low-traffic block. Her truck was visible from the street. She moved it to the alley access behind the building, which was less visible and had the advantage of a direct exit route onto a cross street. Then she went back inside, sat on the floor again, and waited. Reeves called at 12:31. "The number is registered to a prepaid purchased at a convenience store in Carver City 6 days ago," she said. "It's been used twice. Once to call a number registered to one of the 4 deputies who are currently persons of interest, and once to text you." "Which deputy?" "A Travis Meller," Reeves said. "He was Voss's closest operational deputy. He's been cooperative in questioning today. Cooperative enough that we'd categorized him as the least likely to be a continuing risk. Cooperative doesn't mean flipped, Evelyn said. No, Reeves agreed. It doesn't. A pause. I'm going to have Nolan drive by the practice tonight. She won't be visible. That's fine. She thought for a moment. Is Meller the one who was with Voss the first time he came back to the gas station? Younger, narrow face? Yes. She remembered him, remembered the way he'd stood slightly behind Voss with that particular readiness. Not Voss's readiness, not the loose confidence of a man who owned his space, but the tighter attention of someone performing readiness because they'd been told to. He's not the threat, she said. He's the message delivery. Someone told him to send that. Who told him? She thought about the geometry of it. Voss was in federal custody, bail denied. Orbach was in federal custody. Harwick's attorney had him on a tight leash. The four persons of interest had been in and out of questioning all day. The machine was collapsing. She'd watched it collapse in real time across 48 hours. But machines didn't stop generating momentum the moment you pulled the power. They kept turning for a while on whatever was left. Someone who was told about the hearing, she said. Someone who understands that Thursday matters. Wick, Reeves said. I can't prove that. No, Reeves said, but I'm noting it. After the call, she lay back on the floor. Atlas had resettled with his chin on his paws and his eyes half closed, and she listened to his breathing and the ambient sounds of the building. The hum of the HVAC, a car passing on the street at intervals, the building's ordinary nighttime sounds. And she let her body rest while her mind ran the Thursday morning calculation for the next 2 hours. She wasn't afraid. That wasn't what the message had produced. What it had produced was anger, which was more useful, and a clarity about what Stanford Wick's strategy actually was. He wasn't trying to win the suppression motion on its legal merits. The merits weren't strong enough for that. He was trying to erode her before she walked into that courtroom, put her on uncertain ground, make her track threats instead of arguments, make the hearing feel like just one part of a larger siege rather than a legal proceeding she was equipped to handle. She'd been under actual siege in environments that made this particular Tuesday night feel like a scheduling inconvenience. She closed her eyes. Warren Tibbs called at 6:15 in the morning, which was early even for him. The motion Wick filed on the dog, he said. I went through his case history on similar motions. And? He's filed this specific type of motion, property status challenge on evidence adjacent to a suspect, 4 times, Warren said. It's never actually succeeded, but in 3 of the 4 cases, the target of the motion agreed to a plea arrangement in the 2 weeks following the filing. She was quiet for a moment. He's not trying to get Atlas returned to the county, she said. He's using the motion to put pressure on Voss's co-defendants to make deals that exclude Voss from the primary charges. That's my read, Warren said. If Orbach makes a deal that reduces his exposure in exchange for testimony against Harwick, or against whoever the larger state-level figure is, Voss becomes more isolated. And if Voss is more isolated, a jury trial becomes more likely than a plea, which is where Wick makes his money. He's running a strategy for a jury trial, she said, not the suppression hearing. The suppression hearing is the opening move, Warren said. He wants to establish you as a compromised witness before the main event. If he can get Albanese to even partially qualify your testimony, even if the footage is admitted, he's created a narrative he can use at trial. She stared at the ceiling of the back room. Atlas was watching her from the kennel with the patient attention of an animal who had decided her schedule was his schedule and was prepared to adjust accordingly. What do I do with that? She said. You walk into that courtroom on Thursday, and you are exactly who you are, Warren said. Not the SEAL, not the nurse, both of them, all of it. You don't let him separate the pieces because the pieces are what he'll use. Together, they're a complete picture of a person who was in the right place and did the right thing. He's going to go after the psychological evaluations, she said. Probably, Warren said. They're in the service record and they're not sealed. They're also both cleared, she said. Both evaluations resulted in fitness determinations. He'll try to use the questions, not the answers, Warren said. Get the magistrate thinking about the questions. But Marsh, Albanese has ruled on evidence in 17 prior cases involving law enforcement psychology. In 14 of those, she's declined to treat psychological fitness evaluations as credibility impairments. She applies a narrow standard. She sat up. How do you know that? Because I spent 3 hours last night reading her published opinions, he said. I figured you had the perimeter walk covered and the threat analysis covered, and what you needed from me was the legal research. She was quiet for a moment. Warren, don't thank me, he said. Buy me a real meal when this is over. Deal, she said. She let Atlas out for a short controlled walk in the back alley. Osteen's instructions, leash on, no pulling, 15 minutes maximum, and stood in the early morning with the low Texas light coming in flat and gold from the east, and the dog moved carefully beside her, still favoring the rear leg slightly, but with a solidity that hadn't been there 2 days ago. She thought about what she was going to say to Stanford Wick. The Carver City Federal Courthouse was a building that took itself seriously. Marble floors, high ceilings, the specific institutional weight of a place that had been making decisions for a long time and intended to keep doing so. She arrived at 7:40 in clothes she'd driven to her Ridgeline apartment to retrieve at 5 a.m. Dark trousers, a gray shirt, nothing that read as trying too hard or not hard enough. The same careful middle register she'd applied to every environment where being read correctly on first impression mattered. Reeves was in the corridor outside the courtroom. So was Lowe, in a suit that was more carefully pressed than anything he'd been wearing at 2 in the morning in a gas station lot. He looked at Evelyn when she came in with the expression of someone reassessing a situation they thought they understood. Wick is already inside, Reeves said quietly. He brought 2 associates. Is Miguel Prieto's declaration in? Evelyn said. Filed at 7 this morning, Lowe said. Wick will object to its relevance. Albanese will decide whether it gets considered. Will it? My honest assessment? Lowe said. Yes. Albanese is not going to look at a formal declaration from the direct victim of the conduct being investigated and rule it irrelevant without reading it first. She nodded. What about Meller, the deputy who sent the message? He's been brought in for a secondary interview this morning, Reeves said. He's asked for his union rep, which means he's not going to say much. But the fact that someone prompted that message gives Albanese context for why an independent civilian witness might benefit from having that footage treated as clean documentation rather than compromised surveillance. You're going to argue the threat as evidence of why the footage matters, Evelyn said. Lowe is, Reeves said. You're just going to answer the questions. She walked into the courtroom. Stanford Wick was at the defense table, 50s, silver-haired, the kind of physical ease in a courtroom that only came from spending a very large part of your life in one. He looked at her when she entered, and his expression didn't change, which was its own kind of information. He had already decided what she was and how to use her, and he wasn't revising that in real time. She sat in the gallery and waited. Magistrate Ruth Albanese entered at 8:02 and the room stood, and Evelyn watched her and assessed her the way she assessed every room she entered, looking for the quality of attention the person brought to their space. Albanese was late 60s, precise in her movements, with the kind of face that had learned to give away very little in a professional context. She looked at the courtroom the way competent people looked at problems, entirely, without fixating on any single element. Good, Evelyn thought. The hearing opened with Wick presenting his suppression argument. He was very good. She gave him that without reservation. He constructed the argument with the particular skill of someone who understood that legal arguments were also narratives, and that the narrative he was building was one where Evelyn Marsh was not a civilian nurse who had witnessed animal cruelty but a trained intelligence operative whose presence in Delray County on that specific morning was a calculated operational deployment. He didn't say those exact words. He said them in the way that skilled attorneys said things, by implication, by adjacency, by the careful architecture of facts assembled in a sequence that suggested a conclusion without stating it. Lowe countered methodically. He walked through the timeline. Fuel purchase at pump 3, documented at 7:42 a.m., camera already running per standard operating procedure for the vehicle's installed system, first contact with the animal at 7:44, first contact with Voss at 7:51. He presented the camera system's installation records, showing it had been installed 20 months before this incident. He presented Evelyn's clinic schedule showing the confirmed shift she'd been driving to. Albanese listened with the full flat attention of someone who was genuinely processing rather than waiting to respond. Then Wick called Evelyn to the stand. She took the oath and sat down and looked at him, and he looked at her, And there was a moment of the particular stillness that existed before the first question in any exchange where both parties understood what was actually being contested. "Ms. Marsh," he said, "you have a background in Navy Special Operations." "I served in the United States Navy for 12 years, she said. "My role included combat medical support attached to recovery operations. Intelligence adjacent operations," he said. "Medical support," she said. "I was a medic. The operations had various components. Mine was medical." He asked her about her training. She answered each question precisely and without elaboration, giving him the exact information he asked for and nothing adjacent to it. She watched him try to build the picture of a woman whose background made spontaneous civilian action implausible, and she answered each piece of the construction with the specific fact that undermined it without arguing with him, because arguing with him in an Albanese courtroom would look like defensiveness, and defensiveness would look like he'd found something. "You contacted a Warren Tibbs shortly after arriving at the gas station," Wicks said. "I contacted a former colleague for information about county records," she said. "Yes." "A colleague with intelligence community connections." "A colleague who works in private consulting," she said. "He has access to public records databases. I asked him to look up civil complaint filings." "Public records," Wicks said. "That required a contact with intelligence community connections." "It required someone who knew which databases to search quickly," she said. "I didn't have time to do it myself. I had a shift I was already late for." A very small sound from somewhere in the gallery. Not laughter, but the almost laughter of people who found the mundane reason for an operational decision quietly deflating. Wick pivoted. He asked about the psychological evaluations. She saw Reeves, at the prosecution table, sit slightly straighter. "You underwent 2 psychological evaluations during your service," Wick said. "Required after critical incidents," she said. "Standard protocol." "Both were related to operational situations involving significant stress." "Yes." "And in both cases you were evaluated for your capacity to accurately assess and respond to threat situations." "Among other things," she said. "Miss Marsh," he said, "is it possible that your training and your psychological history might lead you to perceive threat or conflict in situations where a civilian without your background would perceive it? A dog in a parking lot?" She looked at him steadily. "Both evaluations resulted in fitness determinations," she said. "My capacity to accurately assess situations was not impaired in the evaluator's professional judgment, not mine." She paused. "But to answer the underlying question, I perceived a dog with visible rib definition, a wound on its rear leg, and an empty water bowl in 84-degree heat. That's not a training-specific perception. It's what was there." "And the confrontation with Deputy Voss, he raised his voice and moved toward me," she said. "I documented it. I left. I came back. I documented more. I made calls to the appropriate agencies, and then I spent the night in the parking lot with a running camera because Agent Reeves informed me there would be no federal presence on the property overnight." She kept her voice even. "At no point did I act outside the bounds of a civilian exercising documented concern for an animal in distress and her own safety when a man came at her in the dark." Wick tried 2 more angles. She answered them both with the same approach, precise, factual, without heat. He was looking for the edge where she'd overcommit to a characterization he could complicate. She didn't give him one. When he was done, Lowe asked 3 questions on redirect. The third was, "Ms. Marsh, you received a threat message at 12:04 a.m. on the night between the incident and this hearing. Did that message affect your preparation for today?" "It made me move my truck," she said, "and then I went back to sleep." Albanese, for the first time since the hearing began, looked at Evelyn directly rather than at her notes. The hearing recessed at 11:15. Albanese said she would return a ruling after lunch. Evelyn sat in the courthouse corridor with a coffee she'd bought from a machine that tasted like it had been brewed in 2019, and Lowe sat down beside her and said, "You did well." "Did I do well, or did Wick not do as well as he needed to?" she said. Lowe considered that. "Both," he said, "which is the best outcome available." Reeves appeared from down the corridor. "Meller talked," she said. Evelyn looked up. "The secondary interview this morning," Reeves said. "His union rep told him to stay quiet, and he did for about 40 minutes. Then he asked the rep to leave." She sat down. He told us he received a call Wednesday night from a number he recognized as connected to Harwick's personal staff. The call told him that if the suppression motion failed and the footage was admitted, certain information about Mellor's financial dealings with the department would become relevant. He was being blackmailed into sending the threat, Evelyn said. Into sending it, and into being prepared to testify that he'd seen Evelyn Marsh meeting with federal agents before she placed her first call to Reeves, Reeves said, which would have supported Wick's argument that she was acting as a directed federal agent from the beginning of the day. False testimony, Evelyn said, which Mellor was not in the end willing to provide, Reeves said, because it turned out that being blackmailed by the people who'd been running your county for 9 years is a clarifying experience. She thought about that. About Mellor, narrow-faced and performing readiness behind Voss at the gas station, having carried whatever the financial entanglement was for however long, and being asked finally to cross a line that was one line past, wherever he'd been drawing them. He'll need protection, she said. He's getting it, Reeves said. Albanese returned at 1:40 p.m. The ruling took 11 minutes to deliver. Evelyn sat in the gallery and watched the magistrate work through her reasoning with the methodical precision of someone who had read everything and was now going to explain what she'd found. She was not unkind to Wick's argument. She noted where it had legal substance, where the questions it raised about civilian documentation in federal investigations were genuinely worth the court's consideration in principle. Then she ruled. The footage was admitted, all 12 hours of it. The motion to suppress was denied in its entirety. The separate motion regarding Atlas's custody was dismissed as procedurally premature and legally insufficient, with a note that the federal hold had been properly executed under the applicable statute and that the court found no merit in the challenge. Wick sat without moving. Lowe made a small notation in his legal pad. Evelyn let out a breath that had been sitting in her chest since midnight. Outside the courthouse, in the flat afternoon light, Reeves walked beside her toward the parking structure. Neither of them said anything for half a block. The Prieto Declaration, Evelyn said finally. Did Albanese read it? She referenced it in the ruling, Reeves said. She didn't cite it directly, but she noted that the court had reviewed all submitted materials and found the documentary record consistent with civilian action motivated by direct observation. She paused. Which is a way of saying Miguel Prieto's statement about what Voss told him, about what the county had been doing and why, gave her the context she needed to read your actions as exactly what they were. Evelyn nodded. What happens now? She said. Now Lowe's office moves forward on the full trial, Reeves said. Voss, Orbach, Harwick, and the state-level figure, whose name will be public by the end of the week, I expect. She paused. It'll take months. These things do. And Mellor. Mellor is cooperating fully. He's giving us the financial structure, how the money moved through the department, how Orbach managed the LLC transactions, how Harwick provided the political cover. She looked at Evelyn. It's significant. His cooperation may be the most significant thing that came out of this week. And Wick, Evelyn said. Wick will keep working, Reeves said. That's what he does. But he built his suppression strategy around making you unreliable, and it didn't work. And the material Mellor just handed us closes the alternative narrative he was building for trial. A beat. He'll negotiate. They usually do when the structure underneath them collapses. She drove back to Osteen's practice in the afternoon. Atlas was in the exercise area, a small secure pen behind the building, when she arrived, moving in the controlled short walk pattern Osteen had prescribed. And he saw her through the fence before she reached it, and his whole posture shifted, the ears coming forward, the body orienting toward her with the specific attention he'd given her since the first morning. She went in and sat on the ground, and he came to her, and she put her hand on his back and felt him settle. That particular exhale of an animal releasing tension it had been holding for a long time. We're okay, she said quietly. It's going to take a while, but we're okay. She meant it for both of them. She was still sitting there when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Not local, not a 432 area code. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. Ms. Marsh, said a voice she didn't know, male, older, with the specific controlled quality of someone who had spent a long time speaking carefully. My name is Arthur Ryan. I'm calling from the office of the Texas Attorney General. She waited. I understand you've had a significant few days, Rain said. I'm calling because of something that came out of the Mellor interview this afternoon. A pause. Something that changes the scope of this situation considerably. Atlas looked up at her. Meller indicated that he was not the only person in Delray County law enforcement who received a call Wednesday night, Rain said. He's given us 3 names. 2 of those names are people you've already encountered in this investigation. A pause, deliberate and weighted. The 3rd name is someone you haven't. She kept her hand on Atlas and said nothing. The 3rd name, Rain said, is on the staff of the federal field office that is currently running this prosecution. The silence on the line lasted 3 seconds, which was long enough for Evelyn to do what she always did when information landed that changed the shape of everything. She breathed. She held it. She let the geometry of it settle before she moved. Who on the staff? She said. I'm not going to give you a name on an unsecured line, Rain said. What I can tell you is that this individual had access to the case file, the witness list, and the timeline of the federal hold on the dog. A pause. They also had access to Agent Reeves's communications log for the last 72 hours. She thought about the threat message at midnight, the prepaid phone, the specific precision of someone knowing she was at Osteen's practice. Meller got the call at what time Wednesday night, she said. 8:47 p.m., Rain said. She had told Reeves she was going to Osteen's practice at approximately 8:30 p.m. The gap between those 2 times was 17 minutes. 17 minutes from her telling Reeves her location to a prepaid phone in Carver City, making a call to a county deputy. Reeves doesn't know, she said. Agent Reeves is not under suspicion, Rain said carefully, but her communications moved through a shared case platform that the individual in question had access to. Another pause. I'm calling you, Ms. Marsh, because you are not on that platform, because nothing you communicate to me right now is accessible to anyone inside that field office. Atlas was watching her. She kept her hand on his back, steady. What do you need from me? She said. Right now, nothing, Rain said. I need you to understand the situation. My office is coordinating with DOJ's Internal Affairs Division. The individual will be identified and removed from the case before any further sensitive information moves through the field office structure. He paused. But I also want you to understand that the suppression motion, the threat message, the pressure on Meller, all of it was more coordinated than it appeared. Someone inside the investigation was providing Wick's strategy with information about your vulnerabilities. She thought about Wick in the courtroom, the precision of his questions about the psychological evaluations, the specific framing around her intelligence-adjacent background. She'd thought he'd built that from her service record. He had, but he'd had help knowing which parts to build with. The psychological evaluations, she said. Yes, Rain said. He knew they existed before he subpoenaed the record. We believe so. She sat with that. 12 years of service. 2 evaluations that said she was fine, both of which she'd passed not because she'd performed wellness, but because she'd actually done the work of being a functional human after situations that had earned their difficulty. And someone inside a federal investigation had handed those records to a defense attorney as a tool. Is the case compromised? She said. No, Rain said, with a firmness that sounded like a man who'd spent the last 3 hours making sure of that. The evidence is intact. The admissions ruling stands. Meller's cooperation is clean. He gave his statement to my office, not the field office, which was a procedural decision made this afternoon before we had the full picture. He paused. What the leak cost is time and your exposure to a threat situation. What it didn't cost is the case. She let out a slow breath. Thank you for calling me directly, she said. Thank Tibbs, Rain said. He flagged the communication timing pattern at 2 this morning. I don't know when the man sleeps. She almost smiled. He doesn't, she said. After the call, she sat in the exercise pen with Atlas for a long time, not moving, just thinking. The sun was going low and the shadows from the fence were lengthening across the concrete in long, parallel lines. She thought about the architecture of what had been built in Delray County. Not just Voss and Orbach and Harwick, but the layers underneath them, the people in other offices who had made themselves useful to the machine and had been useful long enough that the machine had made them dependent on it. That was how it always worked. Not grand conspiracy, just the accumulation of small accommodations, each one defensible in isolation, until the accumulated weight of them made a person into something they probably hadn't intended to become. She didn't find that comforting. She just found it true. The individual identified in the field office was a case analyst named Roy Spiller. and he was placed on administrative leave Thursday evening and formally suspended Friday morning pending an internal affairs investigation that would, Ryan's office confirmed, result in criminal referral within 30 days. He had been providing Wick's team with case file summaries twice a week for the duration of the trial preparation period, in exchange for a payment arrangement routed through one of Harwick's dormant LLCs that Mellor had identified in his financial testimony. The payment trail was clean and documented and added a federal obstruction charge to the case record that Lowe described as, in his careful attorney's language, significantly clarifying for the jury's understanding of the conspiracy's reach. Reeves called Evelyn Friday afternoon. Her voice carried something different from the operational efficiency of the last 4 days, something that was trying to sound composed and was mostly succeeding. "I want to apologize," Reeves said. "You didn't know about Spiller," Evelyn said. "My communications platform was the vector," Reeves said. "You were threatened in the middle of the night because of my case file." "I moved my truck and went back to sleep," Evelyn said. "Don't apologize for something that was done to both of us." A pause. "You're a strange person to work with, Marsh." "I've been told," she said. "What's the case timeline?" "Trial date is being set for 8 months out," Reeves said. "Voss, Orbach, and Harwick are all looking at federal charges across multiple counts. Harwick's attorney opened plea discussions this morning, which Lowe is evaluating. The state-level figure, a deputy comptroller named Garrett Fenn, which will be public by Monday, has retained 3 attorneys and said nothing, which means he's scared." "He should be," Evelyn said. "He should be," Reeves agreed. "Mellor's testimony on the financial structure is extensive. It connects Fenn directly to the land transfer approvals that allowed the scheme to run for 4 years. She paused. "It's going to be a long public process." "It should be," Evelyn said. "Long and public." She meant that. Not from bitterness. She wasn't built for sustained bitterness. It cost too much and returned too little. But from the understanding that the thing that had kept Voss in operation for 9 years was specifically the absence of a long public process. The complaints that went quiet. The cases that were withdrawn. The machine that ran because the running of it was never made visible to anyone who couldn't be managed. Light and time. That was what it needed. Not a hero, just light and time. She went back to work at the clinic in Ridgeline on Monday. The charge nurse looked at her when she walked in and said, "You want to tell me what happened last week?" And Evelyn said, "Not particularly." And the charge nurse said, "Fair enough." And they went to work. On Wednesday, the Austin AG's office held a press conference that ran 45 minutes and covered the full scope of the Delray County investigation. The charges against Voss, Orbach, Harwick, and Fenn, the financial structure of the land fraud, the pattern of civil rights violations and witness intimidation, the 4 years in which the scheme had displaced 17 families from properties in and around Delray County. The AG's office named the investigation and thanked the FBI's Civil Rights Division and the DOJ's cooperation. They did not name Evelyn Marsh. They mentioned a civilian witness whose documentation provided critical corroborating evidence of Deputy Voss's conduct and whose cooperation initiated the acceleration of the investigation's final phase. A civilian witness. That was what she was in the official record, and that was exactly right. She watched the press conference on her phone during a break, standing in the clinic corridor with her coffee, and when it was over, she put her phone in her pocket and went back to her patients. The thing that stayed with her was not the press conference. It was a text she received Thursday morning from a number she didn't have saved, and which turned out to be Miguel Prieto, who had gotten her number from Reeves with Evelyn's prior permission. The text said, "My daughter wants to know if she can write you a letter. She's 12. She heard what you did for Atlas. She wants to be a nurse." She read that 3 times. Then she typed back, "Tell her yes. And tell her she should also be whatever else she wants to be." 6 weeks after the press conference, on a Saturday morning that was cooler than it had been since March, Evelyn drove to Carver City. Atlas had been at Osteen's practice for the full recovery period, 6 weeks of antibiotics, nutritional management, controlled exercise, and the particular careful reconstruction of a working dog's confidence after extended trauma. Osteen had called her every week with updates, and Evelyn had driven down 3 weekends to visit, and Atlas had greeted her each time with the same deliberate certainty. Not the frantic enthusiasm of a dog performing gladness, but the settled recognition of an animal who had decided she was part of his permanent geography. On the Saturday 6 weeks out, she drove down in the green Silverado with a new rear headlight she'd finally gotten around to replacing, and she walked into Osteen's practice, and Atlas was in the front reception area, not the recovery kennel. He stood up when she came through the door. "He's been ready for 2 weeks," Osteen said from behind the desk. "I was starting to think he was going to start redirecting my other patients out of boredom." Atlas walked to Evelyn and stood beside her left leg with the precision of a dog who had spent years being trained to work in exact relation to a person's movement, and she put her hand on his head, and he leaned into it just slightly, not collapsing into her, just the small animal acknowledgement that contact was acceptable. "His leg is fully healed," Osteen said. "The joint inflammation resolved better than I expected. He'll need monitoring, especially in cold weather, but it's not going to limit his function. He'll need continued work to maintain muscle mass. Short runs are fine. Mental engagement is actually the bigger need. He's a working dog without a job, and he's been doing my paperwork." "I can give him a job," Evelyn said. "What kind of job?" Osteen said. She'd been thinking about that for 6 weeks. She'd been thinking about it in the way she thought about things that mattered. Slowly, from multiple angles, not deciding until she understood what she was actually deciding. She had a clinic in Ridgeline. She had a 1-bedroom apartment. She had a schedule that, objectively, was not built around a dog. She also had 12 years of working alongside working dogs in environments where they were the difference between a successful recovery and a catastrophic failure, and she understood working dog psychology in a way that made Osteen's assessment feel like a confirmation of something she'd already known. And she had spent 6 weeks understanding that whatever else she did next, she was not done with what had started in a gas station parking lot. "I've been in contact with the County Animal Welfare Office," she said, "and with a veteran services organization in Carver City. There's a need, specifically for working dogs who've come out of service or law enforcement situations with trauma histories. Dogs that need structured rehabilitation before placement." She paused. "I've been looking at a property outside Ridgeline. It's modest, it needs work, but the land is right." Osteen looked at her for a long moment. "You're building a rehabilitation program." "I'm starting one," Evelyn said. "I'll still do clinical work. I'm not leaving nursing, but this," she looked at Atlas, "this is also something I know how to do." "It's expensive," Osteen said. "The setup alone." "I know," Evelyn said. "I'm working on it." She'd already had 3 conversations with Warren Tibbs about grant structures, and 2 with a veteran services nonprofit in Austin that had expressed interest in a partnership model, and 1 with Lowe's office about whether the county civil settlement fund that was being structured as part of the Prieto family's restitution could allocate any portion to community rehabilitation services. "It's going to take time." "Most things worth doing do," Osteen said. She left with Atlas in the passenger seat of the Silverado, which was not technically a safe placement per the animal transport guidelines, but which he'd arranged himself before she had a chance to set up the cargo area, simply stepping up into the seat and sitting there with his nose pointed at the windshield like he'd made a routing decision and was ready to depart. She didn't make him move. They drove back to Ridgeline on Route 9, west through the flat scrubland with the late morning light coming in golden off the dry grass, and she passed the exit for Delray County and slowed slightly but didn't turn. She kept driving. The trial began 8 months later, on a Monday in February, in the federal courthouse in Carver City, with Magistrate Albanese presiding and Lowe's team at the prosecution table and Stanford Wick, who had not, in the end, negotiated himself out of the full case, at the defense table looking like a man who understood his client was going to lose, but was going to earn every billing hour along the way. Evelyn testified on the 3rd day. She dressed the same way she had for the suppression hearing, dark trousers, gray shirt, nothing that performed anything. And she sat in the witness box and answered Lowe's questions, and then Wick's questions with the same approach she'd applied before, precise, factual, without heat. The courtroom was full. Local press, regional press. 2 national outlets that had picked up the story when Fenn's name became public and the scale of the scheme became apparent. There were families in the gallery, some she recognized from the case files, some she didn't. People from Delray County who had driven 45 minutes to sit in the gallery of a federal courthouse and watch the process that had been withheld from them for 4 years finally happen in public. Gerald Soto was in the 4th row. She saw him when she walked to the stand. He gave her a single nod. Rufus Calloway was 2 rows behind him, in a clean shirt with the Delray Feed and Ranch cap absent for once, sitting with a woman who was probably his wife and who looked like someone who had been waiting a long time for a particular Wednesday to arrive. Wick cross-examined her for 90 minutes. He was good. He found angles she hadn't predicted and asked questions that required more than single-sentence answers. And she gave those answers fully and without the hedging that would have made them sound managed. And at one point, Albanese asked him to clarify the relevance of a question about Evelyn's service record discharge classification, and Wick clarified it, and Albanese noted the objection for the record and sustained it. And that was the moment she watched something shift in the courtroom. The particular shift that happens when a jury of civilians watches a very skilled attorney have a question ruled irrelevant and understands from that ruling something about the quality of the argument being made. After she stepped down, she went back to the gallery and sat in the row behind Gerald Soto and watched the rest of the day's testimony. The verdicts came 5 weeks later. Harlan Voss, guilty on 6 federal counts including civil rights violations, criminal conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Sentenced 8 weeks after, 12 years, federal facility, no parole consideration for 7. Dale Orbach, guilty on 8 counts, 15 years. His attorney's statement afterward described it as disproportionate. Lowe's office described it as proportionate to the financial and human damage the scheme had caused over 4 years, and released a full list of the 17 displaced families, with the amounts they were owed in restitution. Garrett Harwick, guilty on 4 counts. He took a plea that reduced his exposure slightly in exchange for full financial cooperation with the restitution process. His properties, including the 4 held under LLC structures, were liquidated as part of that settlement. The first family that had been displaced from County Road 7 was able to return to their original parcel within 6 months. Garrett Fenn, the deputy comptroller, held out longest. His attorneys filed 17 motions, each of which was ruled upon and denied over a 5-month period. He was convicted on 9 counts in a separate trial that ran 3 weeks and included Meller's testimony about the financial structure in detail that left the jury deliberating for only 4 hours. He received the longest sentence of any defendant, 19 years, which reflected the court's view that his position had given the entire scheme its political durability. Roy Spiller, the field office analyst, pleaded guilty to obstruction and information theft. He received 4 years, which was less than what he deserved, but more than he'd calculated when he'd made the arrangement. And the calculation had turned out badly, in a way he was going to have a long time to think about. Stanford Wick was not charged with anything. He had operated within the lines of his profession, barely. He moved on to his next case. The property outside Ridgeline was a former small ranch operation that had been vacant for 3 years, with a main structure that needed roof work and a series of outbuildings that needed more than that, and 8 acres of flat grassland that needed less than she'd expected. She bought it with her savings, a loan from a credit union that looked at her finances with some concern but ultimately approved, and a grant from the Veteran Services nonprofit in Austin that covered the first 18 months of operational costs. She called it Clearline Ranch, not Atlas Recovery. She'd considered it, but it felt like too much weight for a dog to carry, and Atlas had carried enough. Clearline because she liked the idea of something being clean and direct and without obstruction. She did the roof work herself over 3 weekends, with Warren Tibbs driving down from Dallas to help and mostly getting in the way with good intentions. She hired a contractor for the structural work on the outbuildings. She built the kennels to a specific design that prioritized natural light, outdoor access, and noise management, the things that mattered most for dogs recovering from stress histories. The first 3 residents arrived in April. 2 retired police dogs from a department in East Texas that had downsized its K9 unit and had nowhere to place them. 1 former military working dog who had been in a rescue system for 8 months without placement because his behavioral history made him difficult, and most placements weren't equipped for difficult. Atlas walked the perimeter with her on intake days, not participating in the assessment but present, which it turned out was its own kind of participation. The new dogs watched him. He was demonstrably fine. He had been less than fine and was now fine, which was information that moved between animals in a way she couldn't fully articulate but had observed enough times to trust. The difficult military dog, a Belgian Malinois named Foxtrot, who had bitten 2 people at his previous placement, was assessed in the first week as a significant management challenge and a possible no-placement candidate. By week 6, he was eating from the kennel staff's hands. By week 8, he was sleeping without the alert posture hypervigilance that had been his default. Osteen drove out from Carver City every 2 weeks for veterinary checks and never stopped looking slightly surprised at the rate of progress. And Evelyn never told her to stop being surprised because the surprise kept Osteen sharp, and Evelyn needed her sharp. Reeves called in September. Not about the case. That was fully adjudicated by then. All appeals pending, but no significant legal uncertainty remaining. She called because she was in the area, she said, which Evelyn doubted was entirely true, but appreciated. She drove out to Clearline and walked the property with Evelyn and Atlas, and Evelyn watched her looking at everything with the same calibrated attention she'd applied to a gas station parking lot 9 months ago. "This is not what I expected you to do," Reeves said. "What did you expect?" Evelyn said. "I don't know," Reeves said honestly. "Go back to nursing full-time. Move somewhere else. Not—" She gestured at the property, the kennels, the grassland where 2 of the current residents were in a supervised off-leash session with a handler Evelyn had hired in June. "I am doing nursing," Evelyn said. 3 days a week at the clinic. And the other 4? Evelyn looked at Atlas, who was sitting to her left, watching the off-leash session with the supervisory attention of a senior employee monitoring junior staff. "The other 4 I'm doing this," she said. Reeves was quiet for a moment. "The Prieto family visited last week," she said. "The daughter." "Sophia," Evelyn said. "She came with her mother. She wants to be a veterinarian now. She changed from nurse." Reeves smiled. A full one. The first Evelyn had seen from her that wasn't qualified by something operational. "Good," she said. "More options." "More options," Evelyn agreed. After Reeves left, Evelyn walked the perimeter fence line with Atlas, the way she did most evenings when the work was done and the light was going amber and the grassland took on that honest, flat country quality it had at dusk. Atlas moved beside her left leg with the precision he'd always had, the trained working dog alignment that he'd maintained through everything that had been done to him and everything that had been healed since. She thought about the morning at the gas station, the specific calculation she'd made sitting in her truck on Route 9, 11 miles west, about whether to turn back. She'd framed it then as a decision about a dog. It had also been a decision about who she was when the cost of being that person was inconvenience, delay, and the disruption of a schedule. She wasn't romantic about it. She'd done harder things, in places where the stakes were calibrated in lives rather than civic outcomes. She didn't need this to be the most important thing she'd ever done to accept that it had been worth doing. What she knew, what she'd carried through the suppression hearing and the testimony and the verdicts and the 8 months of building this place, was that the world ran on the accumulated decisions of people in ordinary moments who did or didn't do the thing in front of them. Not on heroes, not on dramatic interventions. On the specific choice, repeated endlessly, of whether to turn around on Route 9. She'd turned around. So had Gerald Soto, eventually, who had come forward as a witness in the trial and testified about what he'd observed over 3 years of running the gas station. So had Rufus Calloway, who had carried an envelope for 6 weeks and found someone to hand it to. So had Travis Meller, who had held the line past where he'd drawn it and then stopped holding it. So had Miguel Prieto, 14 months before any of them, who had walked into a county clerk's office and filed a complaint against a department that had the power to make his life very difficult, because the alternative was continuing to live in a place where no one filed complaints and nothing changed. None of them had been perfect. Evelyn least of all. She'd moved faster than Reeves wanted. She'd physically intervened in a situation she'd been told to document only. She'd made the call to Warren Tibbs before she fully understood what she was calling about. She'd been imperfect and uncertain and operating on instinct sharpened by training in a situation she hadn't fully mapped. That was how it actually happened. Not cleanly, not heroically, just someone who saw something and couldn't make herself look away, followed by the long, complicated, imperfect work of following through. Atlas stopped walking and sat down at the far corner of the fence line, the way he did when he was done with the perimeter and had assessed everything as it should be. She stopped beside him and looked out at the grassland in the last of the light. She thought about what it cost to look away. She'd seen the cost in Delray County. 4 years of it, 17 families, a dog chained to a post as a warning to everyone watching. She'd seen it in other places earlier, where the cost was measured differently, but the mechanism was the same. The accumulated weight of people who calculated that the thing in front of them was not their problem. She was not going to tell anyone they had to do what she did. People had daughters in Beaumont and gas stations on Route 9, and the math of their survival was not simple, and she had no right to simplify it from the outside. She understood that. What she was going to say, if anyone asked, and people had started asking, a reporter from the Carver City paper, a veteran services coordinator who'd heard about the ranch, Sophia Prieto at 12 years old who had changed her career aspirations twice in 9 months and would probably change them again, was that the calculation she'd made on Route 9 was not about whether she was brave enough or skilled enough or in the right position. It was about whether she could live with herself if she kept driving. She'd discovered she couldn't. That was all it had been, at the beginning. Not strategy, not heroism, just a woman who had seen enough of the world to know what it looked like when someone needed help and no one was going to give it, and who had decided one more time that she was going to be the kind of person who stopped. Atlas stood up, looked at her. She put her hand on his head. "Let's go in," she said. They walked back across the grassland toward the lights of Clearline Ranch, and behind them the flat Texas dark came in quietly from the east, and the fence line held, and everything that needed to be fixed had been fixed, and everything that needed time was getting it.